listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for the most disruptive show, covering news and events from these great states as well from across the globe. Starting today, from the left corner, indefatigable, burning emperor in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And of course, that means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We've changed up the format of the show today pretty considerably. Everything from apparently the monologue to headlines. As you can hear, Shane doesn't necessarily sound that great today. Sounds like he has the flu. Are you okay, my man? I hope you don't keel out on me. We need you.
I'm okay. Thank you for asking. No, but I'm letting you take the lead for now. Like you're saying, I just don't know that I can make it all the way through the headlines, which involve a lot of talking without occasionally breaking up in sneezes and stuff. So please take it away.
Nah, I understand. And that's why there's two of us, right? Just in case. One of us gets hit by a bus, the other one retains all of the information to give to the next host. But let's start. In the news, Sweden has rolled out COVID-19 restrictions after refusing to order a nationwide lockdown and instead largely rely on volunteer measures. Public gatherings are now restricted to 8 people, down from a previous limit of 300. The country has also banned the sale of alcohol in bars, restaurants, and nightclubs after 10 p.m. until the end of February. High schools also switched to virtual learning on Monday for the rest of the term. Anders Tegnell, the nation's top epidemiologist, has repeatedly defended the country's call for citizens to hold themselves accountable for social distancing instead of closing borders and ordering lockdowns. But Tegnell, who predicted the country could gain herd immunity, acknowledged last month that the Swedes were facing a resurgence of the virus after initially suggesting that the second wave was unlikely. I want to pause there. My wife pointed out that I don't like to say that I'm right, but she said so sarcastically. Now, the reason I'm pausing here is because there's a lot of stuff that come up over the course of the show that as a radio host, you're in the midst of all sorts of storms with all sorts of opinions. People hate Democrats, and so those people are reflexively against the things that Democrats come up with. People hate Republicans or Trump, and so they're reflexively against those things. And us as radio hosts stand here on the wall, observing the abyss, trying not to be sucked into it. A lot of people wanted to point out that Sweden was a model. And I kept making the point, Sweden is not a model of anything. Many of them have died, especially more than their neighbors. And they kept holding Sweden up as a model. Well, Sweden has just bit the dust. The woman that was going for Giuliani the other day, come to find out, she was on probation for sending pictures or for graphic pictures of having sex to her ex-fiance or to her ex-girlfriend. To her ex-boyfriend's girlfriend. I guess my point is, in many of these things, we have found ourselves on the right side of history because whether it's Russiagate, whether it's this, we've basically held judgment that was most likely to be true. And in this very specific case, Sweden was not a model for anything. And Sweden just proved it by repudiating their previous methods. Shane, what do you think about this? Do you think, it's like, yeah, of course Sweden had to do this because it seemed that things were getting worse. And not just worse. It just seemed like it was getting worse everywhere. Am I wrong on this? Sweden can maybe make an argument that, look, you guys were doing that stuff and you still got hit by a second wave. So what does it mean that we get hit with a second wave just because we didn't do it? But I think the evidence of it is that they are repudiating their previous methods and are clocking down. They went from 300 to 10.
Well, here's the thing. It should make for fun conversations later on in the show. And we're talking with Ian Shilling, Kim Iversen. Should be interesting. Another side of this, though, you can look at this. from a sort of American perspective, there might be something to the fact that when we basically locked stuff down and when we made it a political divide specifically, you basically incited a bunch of it. This is going to sound weird, but you incited a bunch of Americans to not wear masks. Recalcitrant Americans did not want to wear the masks, and so maybe we could have handled that more tactfully in some states. Maybe there could have been something like that. But broadly, I do see this as a repudiation, like you, of the herd immunity approach. Generally speaking, you know what I'm saying.
And by the way, Boris Johnson also repudiated it. He eventually was part of the herd immunity thing in that government. He gets it. He gets extremely ill. He comes back, and that's off the table from that standpoint. Look, we always have the contrary point of view on this show. I mean, I can't think of anybody. Most of the people that we've had on this show that's been recently have been against the election. I think we had like 3 or 4 people who basically said the election was fraud or fraudulent, and we've had that conversation. We had the people who were on the other side of this one, multiple people talking about the masks, even though we have had people for masks too. I guess on this show, we give people both sides. And I don't think there's ever been a situation where we have left somebody off. I think most of our conversations are, hey, I wonder if we can get that person on, not...
How about that? Yeah, how about having an actual conversation about complicated issues? Like, instead of having like an establishment media bubble and an alternative media bubble, and you just kind of never twain do the bubbles meet. We actually have those conversations. What about that, Jamarl?
We have nuanced conversations. So yeah, I was chest thumping a little bit on that one because I'm like, we've had people on for both sides of this, and despite having people on for both sides, we still have an opinion. I don't know. I don't know what else you're supposed to do from a radio show from that standpoint. So let's keep going. Rudy Giuliani has tested positive for COVID-19. President Donald Trump tweeted on Sunday, quote, Rudy Giuliani, by far the greatest mayor in the history of New York City, and who has been working tirelessly exposing the most corrupt election by far in the history of the United States, has tested positive for the China virus. Get better soon, Rudy. We will carry on. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. Trump tweeted. I gotta be honest, I'm shocked that Rudy Giuliani has had an immunity to keep away from COVID this long. I thought he would have had it by now. But get well soon, Rudy, just like Trump said. President Trump urged his supporters to vote for Republican Senator Lindsay Loeffler and David Perdue, Senators Loeffler and Perdue, to prevent the quote, unquote, socialists and communists from gaining control of the U.S. Senate. Trump said that Perdue's opponent, John Ossoff, and Loeffler's opponent, Reverend Raphael Warnock, are the 2 most extreme far-left liberal candidates in history. Keep in mind, they're coming out of Georgia, so let's, in history. That's including Bernie Sanders, that's including FDR, that's including Wallace. So let's be real. Meanwhile, President-elect Joe Biden plans to nominate California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to serve as his first Secretary of Health and Human Services. His department would oversee the distribution of COVID-19 vaccine, and he would be tasked with helping to build public trust in it. Becerra, 62, has served as California's top prosecutor since 2017 when he succeeded now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris in the role. He served in Congress for more than 20 years and was once seen as a potential House Speaker. If confirmed by the U.S. Senate, Becerra will be the first Latino to hold that role. If I am not mistaken, he even was a proponent for Medicare for all. But don't quote me on that one. That's kind of that ancillary knowledge stuff. The Pentagon said Friday it is pulling most troops out of Somalia on President Trump's orders, continuing a post-election push by Trump to shrink U.S. involvement in counterterrorism missions abroad. Without providing details, the Pentagon said in a short statement that a majority of U.S. troops and assets in Somalia will be withdrawn in early 2021. There are currently about 700 troops in the Horn of Africa that we know of, training and advising local forces in the extended fight against the group Al-Shabaab, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Good. Let's just hope they follow through with it. There's been reports of them lying to the president about the number of troops there. But Trump has been pretty decided that he seemed to really want to draw down. So honestly, I hope he does it. Even if Joe Biden comes in and put him back, I don't care. Let him go through the work of putting them back. I want him out. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said on Monday the United States should reduce its interference in China's domestic affairs and development in order to improve relations between the two countries. Wang also emphasized the hope for cooperation while pointing out ways in which the United States could change its approach. The foreign minister was speaking to the United States business leaders via video on Monday. President Donald Trump has pursued a tough policy against China using methods such as tariffs and sanctions. President-elect Joe Biden has said he won't immediately remove tariffs, but will aim to work with other countries to put pressure on Beijing. Wow, I'm always fascinated when people say that, or when Americans or presidents say stuff like that. Let's be very clear. The United States has been using tariffs as a way of getting around the fact that it is having a hard time competing with China. Let's be honest about that, right? That the tariffs that Trump have been using haven't been for legitimate states' reasons, other than a state wanting to stay ahead of another state economically and is having trouble doing so. Our businesses basically made deals to put their products in China or get our products built in China because we can do it for dirt cheap. And the money that we save firing American workers, well, that company can put that money to the top, export it to the top. That CEO can make that much more money by saving money on American workers. Now, though the fact that that American worker can no longer buy the product that is being produced matters a little bit less. And the fact that that American worker is now making a lot less, if he has a job at all, matters less. The company is making a huge amount of profit. And the people who invest in stocks in that company is going to make a huge amount of profit. It is wild to me that Joe Biden is going to say, we're going to keep the tariffs. Why? Because he realizes that the tariffs gives him a certain amount of leeway and a certain amount of political capital where he could say, okay, I'm going to remove this. What are you going to give me for removing this? He's basically going to use what Donald Trump has been doing while not giving Donald Trump credit for it at all. And this, I suspect, is because their plan was the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And it's possible. I don't know if that's still on the table. What do you think, Shane? I mean, I don't like this. Look, I get the language, right? I get the politics of propaganda, where you say certain things, whether the things are true or not, it's almost secondary to the point. You're saying it because you want to have a perspective out there, and you want to keep that perspective out there. And media, who typically goes with an American point of view, is going to back you up in that. So when Biden says he won't remove the tariff, but he will work with other countries to put pressure on Beijing for what? For what? And is there anything that you believe America needs to be pressured on? Probably not. Probably not. What do you think?
Also, I just remember the liberal news media at the time, the establishment media, really hitting Trump hard for his trade war tactics, and now Biden is keeping the tariffs in place.
He's going to use it.
I guess I don't, you see what I'm saying?
He's going to use it. He's basically saying, yeah, they're going to be productive for me when I get in office. Because think of it for the moment. If you're Joe Biden and you're trying to compete with China, I don't know, maybe it's in 5G technology. Maybe it's in microchips. Maybe you need to get rare earth minerals and you don't want China to bring those back. You have tariffs. You can take that off the table. What am I going to get for taking that off the table in some kind of trade relationship? It's that type of stuff. But you're not going to ever own up to the fact that Trump gave you that leeway or that space. I would wager same thing with Iran. Despite the fact that they were with the JCPOA, when Joe Biden gets in, I would wager to you that he is still going to use those sanctions and everything else to get some kind of deal or some kind of negotiation. Unfortunately for him, the hardliners are going to be in play. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's do this. Let's take a break. And we are going to come back with the one and only Garland Nixon, who is in Venezuela. So let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a very brief moment.
Fault Lines.
You check top.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
We are talking.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Nixon. We're joined by Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended. That show airs Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern right here on Radio Sputnik. And by the way, you can and you should follow Garland on Twitter. Garland Nixon. That's his handle on Twitter. Garland, thank you for being with us. You're still over in Venezuela. How are you doing and how is it down there?
It's great. The people are, ecstatic over the election. There's a lot of electricity here in the air. It's still very, very difficult. Of course, the sanctions are weighing heavily on the daily lives of Venezuelans, but they've got a day or two here of true excitement, and that's what I'm seeing right now.
So, Garland, from the standpoint of the election itself, the United States is basically not going to recognize the election, or is it? I mean, I'm shocked. I would be shocked if we do at this point. I mean, we've spent the last several years trying to say that the man who wasn't president, who the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans didn't even know, was somehow president of their country. So what's the expectations of Venezuelans now that the election is finished?
Well, the Venezuelans remember very well in 2016 when Hillary Clinton, all the way up to the day of the election, said, oh, it's a fraud, it's a scam, it's a sham, this thing, we don't trust it, we won't believe it. And the opposition won. And the next day she said the election was great, everything was fine, and it was perfectly fair. So they understand that the United States, that is simply opportunistic. And it's the policy is decided not based on the elections, but the policy is decided based on the fact that they got a ton of oil in the ground. And I think they understand that, and they relate it to you, if to journalists or whoever will ask them. It's amazing how clearly the people understand here. Very poor people, very downtrodden people. We went in some of those areas, and they're very politically sophisticated. I'll put it like this: my experience has been much more so than those in the United States, but they've had difficult times, and I think they really have to be on top of politics.
Did you see, just to be clear, I mean, we have you there on the ground, you were observing the election. Did you see any signs of fraud, anything like that while you were observing this stuff?
It's amazing. This is it's just phenomenal to me. They asked me, I said, questions. I said, I only wish our elections could be like this. Look, it is the elections that the Republicans, the Democrats, oftentimes beg for. Everyone has to have an ID. When you are 14 years old in this country, you get an identification with your picture, your signature, and your thumbprint. When you go to the election booth, you have to present that election. You then walk over to a machine and put your thumb on a machine. I watched this happen. It reads your thumbprint and it pops up that, yes, Garland Nixon, blah, blah, blah. They look at your ID. They look at your the machine. Yep, that's the same person. You then walk over to the machine and guess what pops up? Your picture, your thumbprint with your signature. You vote. It then prints a paper ballot that has your thumbprint, your name, and all that information on it. You sign the paper ballot, you put it in a box. At the end of the day, they look at the machine. Oh, there we go. We got 100 votes, and we got 100 paper ballots. Garland Nixon, Shane Stranahan, blah, blah, blah. It couldn't be easier. And might I add, their election machines cannot be hacked because they're not internet capable. You can't get into them. There's no way to get in them. They use old technology. So old technology always wins. You can't hack it if you can't get in it. It has no Bluetooth. It has no internet capability. You can't get in the machines. It's old school, so it can't be hacked.
Yeah.
So you tell me, Republicans that say, hey, you got to have an ID, you got to have an ID. The left people that say you got to have paper ballots, everybody's got a paper ballot. Please tell me how that's unfair.
Yeah, it's very bizarre in this country. I mean, the Democrats for the last 3 years has basically said there was fraud, there was election hacking. They kept using the term hacking. Russian hacked the election somehow. And yet, they didn't want to do anything about it. Meaning, you basically said that there was fraud. You've screamed about fraud for 3 years, and yet you don't necessarily want to do anything to make the electoral system more transparent, to make it more viable. If you want everybody to have a voter ID, then fine. Make sure everyone has it. They don't do that. Like, basically, it seems like they leave these gaps and holes in the electoral system just to have something to complain about after the fact. And it seems to be one of those things that both parties do. What did we get wrong about Venezuela? Like, I was with a cab driver one
everything.
time. Well, wait. It can't be everything. I was with a cab driver once, and the guy told me they keep lying about my country. And he was saying they were lying about Maduro. They were lying about, the way of living. So when you got there, just as an American, what was the thing where you were like, wow? And as you were there, what are the things where you kind of just, it could be like offbeat things, but the things where you define, yeah, we massively get this wrong. If you're not here, it's hard to get it.
Biosecurity. You can't go with 10 feet without somebody spraying your hands with an alcohol solution or taking your temperature. So it appears to me that this is a country they can't afford to, all of the sophisticated things for COVID. So they go with the very basic, you mask, they give out these face shields. Everybody, you get off the bus, somebody spraying your hands with alcohol solution. You go to get on, can't get on, got to spray your hands with alcohol solution. People walking around spraying stuff all over so they're disinfectant. You walk through these booths and a mist comes out with like an alcohol mist and disinfects everything. So they have fairly simple ways of addressing COVID, but it's everywhere, and they are dedicated to it. And it appears that, look, let's face it, 30 million people in this country, and they've had 892 deaths. They're very, very wary. Even at the voting booth, biosecurity is tops. That's one of the things that you notice, that they do all of the simple things for COVID prevention, and they appear to be working. That's one thing that just glaringly obvious at you.
That's very interesting. And I'm curious, actually, this ties into the other side of this conversation, of course. Venezuela in lockdown right now, also suffering through sanctions, economic deprivation on a larger scale. Lockdowns broadly, one of the big points against them, of course, is that they've hurt the economy. How's that working out? How are they dealing with that? How does it seem while you're down there now, especially, up here in the north? It's we're going into cold and flu season. Might not be the case down there, but just how is it? In the economic relationship with the lockdown that they have going, and how is their lockdown being handled? Garland.
I've been told that they're doing like rolling lockdowns, like there'll be a week lockdown and a week not lockdown. You know what I mean? They do it like that. They do it differently, but their biosecurity measures are so intense, not sophisticated, simple, but intense. So it just seems to be working. The economic problems here clearly are as a result of the sanctions. That's their problem. Everything you see, that's their problem. Let me tell you something I was surprised at in talking to the masses, the poor, the working class, the people of color, but which is all one. But man, they despise Barack Obama. Woo! I saw like pictures of him with devil horns painted in some of the poor communities. They hate that guy. And the reason is that this is what I was told by lots of people, in 2016 was their worst year ever. That's what they call it. And they said that because Barack Obama named them like a state sponsor of terrorism or national security threat, this country, I heard it like this, it's a country that lives off of corn. They eat corn biscuits or something, arepa, 3 meals a day. It's their staple. In a way, it's like rice in China. If you take the rice away from China, the people would have problems. Well, they imported all their cornmeal. Barack Obama does this. And it took them a year to get their cornmeal situation together because all of a sudden a country that lives off of corn has no cornmeal. They told me you could walk around the streets and literally see your friends and neighbors getting skinnier and getting emaciated because nobody had enough food for an entire year of 2016. They blamed that on Barack Obama, and man, they despise him with the flame of 1,000 suns. I didn't know that till I got here.
You know, that's amazing. I mean, when I always bring that up for Obama, because to me it's such a bizarre thing. Obama comes out, he's in a press conference, he's talking, and he says Venezuela is a state sponsor of terror. And I remember thinking to myself, how? And nobody said how. Like, nobody asked the very basic question of how is that country a state sponsor of terror, especially any way that's going to be adversely affecting the United States. It's ludicrous. And nobody, you know, it's like those lemmings just kind of run with it. It's so sickening. So basically when he did that, it created difficulties there. I mean, because what people don't realize is when these things have designations and there's certain things that happen as a result, like Myanmar and the slavery thing, it's like they had to be taken off the list for them to be included into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Or if I'm not mistaken, I want to say Ethiopia. No, not Ethiopia. It was one of the countries that that got involved with Trump to get themselves. I know what it was. It was the associations with Israel. It was like Bahrain. It was UAE. It was Somalia. I believe it was Somalia. Somalia was a country that was trying to get itself off the list, and Donald Trump was like, "If you give us X amount of money, so we could put in escrow for so forth." But my point is, it was the naming, it was the categorization that they needed to get rid of in order for them to get off some kind of list. I guess I'm making the point that this was the same thing associated with Venezuela. By calling them state sponsor of terror, it created, I guess, real world phenomena that made it difficult for them to eat. But this was not sanctions. Yeah. This was even without sanctions.
Well, what happened was when you do that, everyone knows that sanctions are coming. They're state sponsor of terror. It's automatic sanctions. So all of these people that were selling them the cornmeal and things like that stopped. They're like, uh-oh, we know what's coming. So they stopped immediately. So now they don't have it. So it took them a year to produce their own and et cetera. But here's what Barack Obama did. He starved an entire nation of mostly brown people. For all this crap about, oh, he's a black guy and he's blah, blah, blah. He starved. He created famine. And they have not forgotten it. But of course, it wasn't reported in the United States. And, you know, I mean, now they're basically saying remove the sanction. And what's interesting is when I talk to people here of, you know, I say Juan Guaido and Guaido people, here's what they say. Oh, you mean the fascists? That's how they refer to them, the fascists. I mean, they're just the fascists. Yeah, the fascists. Or fascistas or whatever it may be. That's what they can speak. So Guaido is, it's interesting that, you know, Nancy Pelosi and these people are like, Donald Trump's a fascist. We hate him. We've got to stop the fascism. And you are supporting a guy in this country who has a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of support and is the furthest of far right. He's to the right of Donald Trump. He is viewed by these people as a fascist. But Nancy Pelosi is clapping, saying this guy's in charge of a country who, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, based on what I've seen, this guy couldn't be president. They'd tear him limb from limb. I heard people literally say that. We would pull his arms and legs off. I'm like, oh boy, okay. You know? So that is grisly. We've only got like a minute left. So I'm curious. You can talk about whatever you want to. I'm curious. Did you meet anybody who was supporting Guaido there? You're talking about the tiny sliver of support he has. Did you meet anybody in person during the election who supported him? I met former supporters, basically the right wing. I met people who were right wing that used to support him, that were part of his coalition. Here's what happened. These sanctions hurt so bad that the people in the coalition are like, hey, we're hungry too. We can't get gas. Wait a minute. We thought this was going to work out. So they're like, we've been going on a year. These sanctions are hurting Venezuela. They're somewhat nationalists, right? But they're nationalists saying this is our country. And, hey, we're all for change and we don't like Maduro. So now those same supporters said, look, we're going to go back and we're just going to try to run and we're going to try to do this the constitutional way. And then the U.S. government says, oh, Now you're a Maduro supporter. And they're like, no, we just don't like this. You're a Maduro supporter simply because you won't boycott the elections. So his coalition fell apart, and he's just, I don't know what the heck they're going to do. This thing has turned into a joke, but they're starving and they're making an entire country suffer. And I don't even understand why. Excuse me, I think we know why, and the people know why. They got too much oil. And that oil's got to go to Exxon and Shell and all of that stuff.
Garland, thank you so much for joining us.
All righty, thanks.
For those listening, Garland Nixon is a Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended. That show airs Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern right here on Radio Sputnik. And we're going into a break, and we'll be back in just a minute talking with Elijiah Magnier. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested.
I don't have Elijah yet.
Eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
No, Elijah.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys enjoy this content, whatever platform you're consuming us on, definitely give us a like and definitely give us a share. Also, if you guys are in Washington, D.C., you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. And as we said, whatever platform you're consuming us on, whether audio or video, definitely like and share. Also, if you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Definitely feel free to call in. But joining us right now for this segment is Elijiah Magnier, a veteran war correspondent. You can find his reporting on elijahjm.wordpress.com. Elijah, welcome back to the show. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you. So we want you on to have this conversation about Iran and Israel. Specifically, there's been a lot of provocation going on between Israel and the United States towards Iran. Everything from the killing of the 2 people recently, the nuclear scientists. In addition to, it was also another general or commander that was less known in the United States, but was also killed around the same time as the nuclear scientist was killed. There was also Soleimani. All of these things was taking place within the context of 1 year. Also, with the transition between Biden and Trump, it seems that there's questions on whether or not Israel is going to create a provocation in this kind of interregnum between the 2 administrations. So what do you think? Why is Israel believing, or why does Iran believe Israel is up to something right now?
Actually, the killing of the nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, has no strategic value for Israel or for the United States.
He is the CEO. He is the head of the program. Under him, there are 150 scientists working. Therefore, the removal of a director is not going to change anything, absolutely nothing. And the killing in this particular period, less than 50 days before Trump steps down, if he steps down, of course, it is a clear provocation to Iran to respond and retaliate, like when the Americans killed the Brigadier General Qasem Soleimani, and Iran retaliated by bombing the U.S. base in Iraq in Ain al-Assad. Therefore, Trump is really with the finger on the trigger in the last days in office, wanting to respond, wanting to go for a little battle or a war. And Israel believes this is a great opportunity because President-elect Biden may not accept to be dragged to a war by Israel. Therefore, mounting an operation that needs months of preparation, to do it in this particular moment, it has one purpose, it's to drag Iran and the rest of the Middle East to a war. And Iran is not going to do it because it understands what is the objective behind it. And for Israel to go to war alone is out of the question, because Israel has a problem, a financial problem economically, because of the coronavirus. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has another domestic problem because now we are heading toward a fourth election, and he has thousands of people manifesting under his house since months. And because the Israeli army is really not ready, neither the internal domestic front is ready for war, to go to shelters and to have to be able to respond to a massive missile attack in case Israel wants to go to war and drag Iran and its allies. So the only way is to drag the U.S. in, and it seems Trump is willing to go to this adventure and taking the whole United States with him to this war.
You know, is it also possible that in addition to, let's say, a larger provocation, meaning pulling the United States into a war, is it also possible that the goal could be to tarnish any relation that Biden could have? Meaning, it's one thing to try to pull Iran, and with this notion that Iran is going to respond in a tit-for-tat measure, that it has to respond because it can't necessarily accept a provocation without any kind of response. It's kind of just the way powers relate to one another. But any response is going to have, I guess, a counter response by Joe Biden, or at the very least creates this kind of bad blood between the U.S. and Iran. Is it possible that the goal of it isn't necessarily an entire full-scale war, but basically to make sure that the relations between Iran and the United States stays tarnished, even in a Biden administration?
Well, I think the color and the type of the relationship is really defined by the president, because he is the one who's holding the power. Once Trump leaves the White House, Biden will come in, and it will depend on him in which direction he's going to take his country in relation to the nuclear deal. There is a deal with Iran in 2015, and Biden was a vice president. Is he going to honor this deal? The retaliation against Israel is not a retaliation against the United States. And both Biden and the leaders in Iran understand the game of Trump and the Israelis, and they're not going to fall into it. However, it doesn't mean that Biden is going to come and lay down the red carpet to the Iranians. On the contrary, he may also put more conditions or different conditions, for example, include Saudi Arabia and the Emirates in the nuclear deal. Iran is not ready to negotiate absolutely with the nuclear deal that took 10 years of negotiation to reach and was approved by the United Nations, by the 5 members of the permanent members of the United Nations, including Germany. But it seems they are fiddling, because we heard the German foreign minister the other day saying, yes, we need to include the Iranian missile program. And that is not the nuclear deal. Either you talk about nuclear and you stop Iran from going toward the nuclear bomb that it has never said it's going to do it, and you limit the capability to reach nuclear capability for Iran, the military nuclear capability, or you leave Iran and then Iran will go full nuclear, even if it doesn't want to make a bomb, but it has this possibility, and then you take the risk. But Iran is absolutely not going to negotiate, neither on the missile program because it's defensive, or the relationship with its allies, but it can sit around the table and find a way to reach a peace in the Middle East where all the Iranian allies and the Iranian enemies in the region can sit around the table, discuss a peace deal, and end this state of war that is permanent in the Middle East since many decades.
What do you see? What would you see the U.S. or Israel or relevant countries in Europe doing to open a diplomatic conversation up to sort of ease tensions with Iran? It doesn't need to be entirely probable that these countries will do these things, but I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the slightly more probable opportunities here from the end of the United States? Again, not saying that the Biden administration would do this stuff, but what reasonable things do you think Iran would like to see that could ease some of these tensions?
Well, Iran would like to see what all the sensible people in the Middle East would like to see. For example, first, the withdrawal of the American forces from Syria and to stop stealing the Syrian oil, because Trump said, I want the oil and I want to take it. That is unlawful against the international law. There is no international law. To withdraw from the Tanaf border between Syria and Iraq, to allow the commercial line to regain so the Syrian population can breathe. The war is almost over in Syria. So what's the point? Also, Iran would like to see the Americans respecting the binding decision of the Iraqi parliament to withdraw forces from Iraq and to keep good relationship with the Syrian government, with the Syrian people, with the Iraqi people, with the Iraqi government, and also to stop interfering in Lebanon and to leave Afghanistan. So leave the Middle East to the Middle Eastern. Don't push the Middle Eastern to invest their money to buy weapons from the United States and use it against Middle Eastern. And finally, Iran would like to see the end of the Yemen war. That is the biggest humanitarian catastrophe ever seen. 24 million people suffering. Everything you can mention and imagine, famine, diseases, lack of water, drinkable water, no electricity, everything. So all that doesn't make sense to keep the Middle East on fire all the time just to sell weapons. Unfortunately, we are talking about an ideal world, and I don't think Biden is going to head toward that.
Wait, what do you mean? You say you don't think Biden is going to... I didn't hear the last part. Can you repeat the last two words?
I don't think Biden is going to do it. I don't think Biden is going to pull out from Syria, from Iraq, stop the war in Yemen, stop interfering in Lebanon, because that goes against Israel. And the Americans don't have any interest in the Middle East to do these things, apart from having good relationship, good business. But it is the Israeli interest that they are fulfilling.
Well, there's also the issue of oil. You don't think oil plays a role in the U.S., let's say, influence in that region or interests in that region? Do you think it's solely Israel?
Well, Trump said we have enough oil and we are the largest oil producer in the world. Venezuela has oil, it's just next door, and the U.S. is not allowing it to extract it and to sell it. There is oil in the Middle East and the price is really down, and Middle Eastern countries and regimes and governments are not surviving because the price of oil is down, and mainly they rely mainly on oil. So what are we going to do with the oil, with all this oil? It's just to allow them to buy more weapons. This is all what we are doing.
Interesting.
So no, it doesn't make sense to do that.
Okay, the voice you guys are listening to is veteran war correspondent Elijiah Magnier. Elijah, can you pronounce your last name? I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. I always feel like I'm getting it wrong when I say it.
It's Magnier. You're saying it perfectly well.
Oh, okay. Magnier. Okay, thank you. Elijiah Magnier, a veteran war correspondent. You can find his reporting at elijahjm.wordpress.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Elijiah Magnier. He's a veteran war correspondent, and you can find his reporting at elijahjm.wordpress.com. Elijah, am I right in thinking that you have been in Venezuela over the weekend? Are you down in Venezuela? Have you been covering the elections there?
Yes, I am, and I'm talking to you from Caracas now.
Okay, I'm curious. So I'd love to open up that conversation. A lot more to talk about on a couple of fronts here, but let's move to Venezuela for a minute. What has it been like? First of all, what have you been down there doing? Have you been reporting, observing the election? What has your role been? What role have you assumed down there? And then what have you, just in a broad sense, what have you seen so far?
Well, first of all, I'm really enjoying being in Venezuela because I never like to report about the country without being on the ground. And that has been my principle from the beginning of my career 35 years ago. And I always covered every single country from the ground. Being in Venezuela allowed me to open my eyes on many things. I see so much similarity between Venezuela and the Middle East in the matter of the U.S. sanction on this country. The country here managed to stand on its feet because the population is supporting the local government. It's supporting the local president. They don't want Juan Guaido, that is the speaker, to be nominated a non-elected president. They go to vote, and they went to vote 277 members of the parliament, and there are 14,400 candidates of 107 parties, groups, and independents. So the U.S. administration and the European community here rejected and condemned the result of the election even before they take place. It's because they are sure that President Maduro is going to win. Even if the four opposition political parties refused to join, it is because they were sure they're going to lose. So being here and understand the mentality, how the people react to the U.S. Sanction, which is completely different from the Middle East, but the sanctions are the same. They are unlawful, they violate international law, and they starve the population. And this is exactly what's happening in Venezuela. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, but the 6 refineries depend on the U.S. Its money is in the U.S. bank, its gold is in the U.K. bank, and they're both frozen because the U.S. and the U.K. decided to stop supplying the Venezuelan government from its own money, and they prevent sending spare parts to its refinery. They prevent spending medical supply, food, everything. It's exactly what they are doing now with the Caesar law in Syria. It's exactly what they are doing now in Iran on a smaller scale, because in Iran, they only left the air without sanctions. Here, they still are in a much better shape, but they're not used to it. They need time to get used to it. In Iran, since 1979. Here, they've started only a few years ago. So they need time to think about alternatives and how they should depend on themselves. And this, having a big window on the Middle East and compared to Venezuela, it's a really unique opportunity for me to be able to see both sides and see how the U.S. administration is behaving, and also notice how the course of the Venezuelan leadership is still believing in the U.S. administration that is going to change, and believe above all in the U.S. population. And I said to the foreign minister yesterday in a one-to-one conversation, I said, Minister, this is your wishful thinking, because the population in the U.S. is not very well informed about the foreign policy of the U.S. and what their country is doing abroad. Only a small elite of the population are warmongers, and they're the mainstream media that mount another kind of war. And there are very rare, like yourself, the media who try to portray the real news and the information from the ground and to describe things as they're happening. So let's say that they accuse Venezuela and its regime of being corrupted. Okay, I accept that. All regimes are corrupted. Why Trump needs to defend himself and his family? Why he's dealing with the Saudis that are corrupted? Why he's dealing with all... He said it himself. He doesn't mind non-democracy, dictatorship, anything. He just needs money to be flowing in the United States. So and if it is corrupted, they have a democracy, and you are rejecting their democracy of going to vote, and you are appointing an ex-speaker as a president over a population who the population said no. So if we take exactly the example of before Nicolas Maduro, we take the example of Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez was elected as a president. He was put in jail by the opposition who thought they can remove him. A few days later, he was brought back to power by the population. He was given again 63% of the vote. Again, 5 years later, 54%. And if you look at the very small number of the voters, we know that in Latin America, when people go to vote for the parliament, the percentage is very small. If you look at Costa Rica, there were 24%. But when they go to vote for the president, then the numbers are higher than 50%. And particularly, we have a special case today everywhere in the world, which is the coronavirus. And with the coronavirus, people are not going to be encouraged to go and vote. Also, we should not keep away the fact that the four larger opposition groups decided to boycott the elections because they knew they were losing. So seeing all this fascinating carpet and all this bouquet of movement and interaction and compare it with the Middle East, for me, it's a unique experience.
It's interesting. It sounds strange, but there is a connection between Venezuela and Iran. Like you said, the way the sanctions are being applied, but also Venezuela and Iran have been in trade relationship recently. I mean, with the tankers going between the two nations. There's another allegory here that I kind of want to point out. In any normal course of events, if Juan Guaido would behave in the way that he behaved, meaning if somebody in the United States behaved like that, where a foreign country overtly is working through this individual to take control of the country, to put in his regime, to be backed by some other country, he would be shot as a traitor to the country. I mean, honestly, he would be held up for treason. He would be put on trial, and he would likely be tried and killed. At least that's what we do in the States. In Iran, but they didn't want to create a provocation, meaning they didn't want to create the situation where the U.S. or some other countries, some of the other patsy nations, will have justification to basically invade or to attack because of doing something like that, despite the fact it would have been under the course of legal or under their laws. Iran is in somewhat of a weird situation now that if they respond, the response allows the United States to also retaliate. Now, under normal circumstances, good sense would say, well, the United States has been attacking Iran multiple times. Why wouldn't they respond to this? But the U.S. media doesn't do that. They doesn't necessarily pay attention from a contextual standpoint. They talk about this stuff purely from the standpoint of U.S. interests. Meaning, and this kind of gets to the point about Joe Biden. If Joe Biden comes in after Iran, let's say, responds, and let's say the response is against a U.S. base, I get the feeling that Biden has to respond. He has to retaliate, despite the fact that Trump was the one that initiated. What do you think Iran's retaliation is going to be for the killing of Fakhrizadeh. I believe that's the pronunciation of the name. And do you think that response is going to be before or after Joe Biden? And if Iran responds, do you believe that Joe Biden is also going to respond? This gets to my notion of tarnishing the relationship between administrations even after Trump leaves. What do you think?
Well, I fully agree with everything you said, starting from Juan Guaido, who asked U.S. armed intervention in the country. That's a high treason. That is true. And President Maduro allowed him to be, just waited for the new election to come to take away the legitimacy of the speaker, because he is the speaker, and today he is no longer the speaker. As in relation to what Iran's response can be, I don't think Iran will go and attack the U.S. because Israel said, we've done it. When the killing of Qasem Soleimani, Trump came out and said, we've done it. So that's why they responded to the Americans. The Israeli now, they did everything in their power to say, we have done it. And now the way they have to respond is to do it for that. And the response is not related to the time and the ground. So they're not going to be dragged to the time that is imposed by the Americans and the Israelis. They're not going to be dragged by a retaliation that can cause war. What they can do is wait and retaliate in other forms. They can do it through allies. They can do it in other grounds. They can do it through the allies of the United States. It can be Yemen against Saudi Arabia and hitting the oil in Saudi Arabia. That hurts everybody. And Iran is preparing for a possibility that Biden will violate the nuclear deal and would say, I want to include other elements, and Iran will certainly refuse it. That's why they are preparing with the government, with a new president that is a hardliner, and that is not going to compromise like President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif. So these are the form of retaliation Iran can do without provoking a war. There is no point in going to a full military war scale just to trigger, to allow the U.S. to flex its muscles and the Israelis to go and bomb in Iran when Iran is under sanction. There are other ways. There are the cyber war. There are all different kinds and shapes of war. So this is what Iran is expected to do, and is not going to do it in a time that is imposed by the Israelis and the U.S. as long as Trump is saying, I am going back to the White House in a few weeks. I don't want to leave the White House. So he's still belligerent. He's still confrontational. So it's better to leave him. He's like an elephant in a china shop.
And what would you make in our last minute or so of the back and forth, the comments that took place this weekend from a vice admiral on America's side who said he had a quote-unquote healthy respect for Iran's regular navy, and then an Iranian admiral, the foreign ministry spokesperson, was saying that, that they're happy that the Americans in this case, quote, got the message and made its behavior more respectful, end quote. Is that genuine? Is that a signal of any deeper change in policy? What do you think is going on here? Is this just rhetoric? What do you see, Elijah, in our last minute?
The Biden administration is extremely worried to take office with a war ongoing between Iran and America as Trump wants. That's why there are signals and there are back channels sending messages to say, patient. We saw the former CIA director saying the same thing, condemning the Israeli attack, describing it as unlawful and violating international law. That is unheard of. We saw the European condemning it. We saw the Emirates and Bahrain. So all these are messages to Iran to calm down, because these countries will never do that without the suggestion from the Americans. And we're talking
1 minute
about the Americans is not the Trump administration, but the forthcoming Biden administration. So Biden wants to make sure he's not going to take office in the midst of a war. That's a message, and Iran is going to respond to that. And it has already responded to Biden by refusing to sit with Trump around the table, not to give him his card that he wanted to boost his election before the election. So therefore, there is this kind of harmony, because the Iranians want to give Biden a chance and don't want to burn all the cards before he reached power.
30.
That's heartening. That, Elijah, we're out of time. That is good to hear. The only hope here is that returning to the earlier aspect of our conversation, that would precipitate some wider withdrawal from our various involvements, our armed involvements, the wars that we've been engaged in the Middle East for years now. In any event, Elijiah Magnier, veteran war correspondent, you can find his reporting at elijahjm.wordpress.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in just a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation from propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am the tired, the sick, the weary, Shane Stranahan, your political analyst.
Nevertheless, you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, I'm sorry, my man. It happens to the best of us. But you're young and healthy. You'll get well soon. And I know the hopes of all of the audience members are right there and wishing you well. So we appreciate you still fighting through it to be here on the show.
You're doing a great job. Normally when I do the tired, the sick, and the weary thing, I'm completely joking. This time there's some truth to it. I am sick. Not too tired or weary, but anyway, thank you. Back to the headlines.
All right.
Pick it back up tomorrow.
In the news. Sweden has rolled out COVID-19 restrictions after refusing to order a nationwide lockdown and instead largely rely on voluntary measures. Public gatherings are now restricted to 8 people, down from a previous limit of 300. The country also banned the sale of alcohol in bars, restaurants, and nightclubs after 10 p.m. until the end of February. High schools have also switched to virtual learning on Monday for the rest of the term. Anders Tegnell, the nation's top epidemiologist, has repeatedly defended the country, calling for citizens to hold themselves accountable for social distancing instead of closing borders and ordering lockdowns. But Tegnell, who predicted the country could gain herd immunity, acknowledged last month that the Swedes were facing a resurgence of the virus after initially suggesting that a second wave was unlikely. Speaking of virus news, Rudy Giuliani has tested positive for COVID-19. President Donald Trump tweeted on Sunday, quote, Rudy Giuliani, by far the greatest mayor in the history of New York City, and who has been working tirelessly exposing the most corrupt election by far in the history of the United States, has tested positive for the China virus. Get better soon, Rudy. We will carry on, Trump tweeted. There's a lot of exclamation points in there. That's not just me adding that. I'm trying to get in the spirit of Trump when he's giving those tweets. I'm going to miss the tweets. Trump is quite possibly the most prolific tweeter in the history of Twitter. He uses Twitter in the way that Luke Skywalker uses a lightsaber. He's great at it, whatever you want to think about it. But he's not going to have that as president anymore. So Joe Biden, not as good as tweeter. We're going to miss out on that. We just have to live with that. President Trump urged his supporters to vote for Republican senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue to prevent the socialists and communists from gaining control of the U.S. Senate. Trump said that Perdue's opponent, John Ossoff, and Loeffler's opponent, the Reverend Raphael Warnock, are two of the most extreme far-left liberal candidates in history. Meanwhile, President-elect Joe Biden plans to nominate California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to serve as his first Secretary of Health and Human Services. His department would oversee the distribution of COVID-19 vaccine and will be tasked with helping the public build trust in that vaccine. Becerra, 62, served as California's top prosecutor since 2017 when he succeeded now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris in that role. He served in Congress for more than 20 years and was once seen as a potential House Speaker. If confirmed by the United States Senate, Becerra will be the first Latino to hold that role. The Pentagon said Friday it's pulling most troops out of Somalia on President Donald Trump's orders, continuing a post-election push by Trump to shrink the United States' involvement in counterterrorism missions abroad. Without providing details, the Pentagon said in a short statement that a majority, quote unquote, of U.S. troops and assets in Somalia will be withdrawn in early 2021. There are currently about 700 troops in the Horn of Africa nation, training and advising local forces in an extended fight against the extremist group Al-Shabaab, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. You know, Shane, they always say they're training. And yet, one of the agents was killed recently. Now, they said that gentleman was part of the CIA, but they always use the term training. And fact of the matter is, you always have to just take their word for it. If we have special operations there, that's not just training. And, you know, like we had the guest on before, they made the point that they were lying to the president about who was there and how many people were there and how many troops were there, etc. And so Donald Trump,
ambassador to Syria.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and he knew about it. Other people lying, but he was part of it.
Trump is still trying to pursue this case. I mean, pulling the troops down out of Afghanistan, pulling them down out of Somalia. Why do you think he's still trying to do this at this point? Do you think this is just him trying to keep, you know, saying that this is my legacy, that I did what I said I was going to do when I was going to pull down troops? Like, what is his motivation at this point once he realizes he's lost? Because this argument to the senators, Loeffler and Perdue, is basically, or to the public is, hey, you don't want these socialists to take it all, because he knows he's not going to be there, which is an admission that he lost. So what is the drive? What is the incentive? It's like they used to ask, what was the motto? What was the incentive for the German soldiers to fight all the way to the destruction of Germany? Well, what is the incentive for Trump in this case? What do you think it is anyway?
I think you already hit your first thought, best thought in some sense. I have a few more conspiratorial things my mind goes to, but I think ultimately it's just he made the promise to his voters to withdraw. He made the promise to the troops to withdraw, and he's trying to implement that in a broad basis. And then, you know, then there's this sort of dialectical thing where you can say, okay, what kind of move is he potentially forcing from Biden or from other elements of the government in opposition to what he's doing there, and why would he want to do that? I don't know. That gets into other stuff, and frankly, I think the simplest is probably the truest explanation, which is just that he made the promise to withdraw, and so he's trying to do so. You know?
Yeah, I agree. That makes the most sense to me. I mean, as opposed to him trying to, you know, take over America by putting people in the military positions and that type of stuff, the way these guys were talking about. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said on Monday that the United States should reduce its interference in China's domestic affairs and development in order to improve relations between the two countries. I love this point. Reduce its interference. You don't have to stop it, just reduce it. I love that. We don't want anybody to interfere in our affairs in this nation. China's like, we accept that you're going to do that because nations do that, but just reduce it. I love that. Wang also emphasizes hope for cooperation while pointing out ways in which the United States could change its approach. The foreign minister was speaking to a group of U.S. business leaders via video on Monday. President Donald Trump, has pursued a tough policy against China using methods such as tariffs and sanctions. President-elect Joe Biden said he won't immediately remove the tariffs, but will aim to work with other countries to pressure or put pressure on Beijing. For what? Who knows? Iran said Monday it was glad the United States got the message and modified its behavior in the Persian Gulf after the U.S. Navy official in the region said his forces had reached a state of deterrence with Iran after months of regional attacks and seizures at sea. We are happy that the other party has got the message and made its behavior more respectful, quote, unquote, Foreign Minister spokesman Saeed Katzenberg. Oh, wow. Let's go with Saeed, told reporters. He said the U.S. military is, quote, the main source of tension, unquote, in the region, and that Iranian forces have always acted professionally. Quote, unfortunately, the United States has often had an unprofessional approach towards Iran's Navy, unquote. He said he was responding to Vice Admiral Sam Poparo's remarks delivered at a conference in Bahrain on Sunday. Poparo, who oversees the Navy's Fifth Fleet based in Bahrain, said the two sides have reached a state of, quote, uneasy deterrence, unquote, and that he had a healthy respect for Iran's regular Navy and naval forces of its Revolutionary Guard. You know, that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. I had some severe qualms when people in this administration would act as if the Revolutionary Guard were terrorists. Oh, I have some severe qualms with that. Because what does that mean? That means you're basically, conceptually, you are basically saying that members of their military, who are just like members of our military, and who are joining the military for various reasons, many of which are tied up in the notion of defense and honor and respect, just like our military, are somehow terrorists. Oh, that bothers me, that plagues me deeply, because our troops could be seen the same way. You gotta be careful with that. I mean, the respect that's given to some degree is the respect that you want in return. And I don't think any of these countries are asked for, any less than that or any more than that. And at the very least, I think it's really interesting that he says right here, he had a healthy respect for Iran's regular Navy. And what did Iran say? Thank you for respecting our Navy. Like some of the stuff is just basic, right? I mean, when they used to capture soldiers from other, in wars or whatnot, they would treat the soldiers with a modicum of respect, even from the standpoint of the generals or from the people who are higher ups. They would give them a certain amount of respect. It doesn't seem that we have that, and it seems like we've been losing that, especially in this administration, towards other members of the military. It is very bizarre when you see that happen. Have you seen them do that, Shane? I mean, is this just me that I remember Trump them acting as if the Revolutionary Guard were somehow terrorists? We were treating them as such?
No, we do that, and I know people who view them that way too. No, I mean it's because they, like we do, they will train folks in other countries, and so specifically Hezbollah, they've worked with them, they've worked with other groups, but we do that too.
We do it too.
And I don't want to rely. I don't want to rely too heavily on the tu quoque, on the fallacy of hypocrisy, but we do that. We do that too. In fact, that seems to just be how sort of modern post-war doesn't make any sense, but post-war war works. In other words, proxy wars, where you're sort of, you're working with people remotely. That's just how that whole thing works. And then, of course, the hypocrisy, the real hypocrisy, and the real inconsistency here is in who we choose to label terrorists, and the fact that we support and have historically supported the terrorists far more than any other country that I'm aware of. So, that's where I think it really doesn't. It stops making sense completely. Anyway, Jamarl.
Let's go to the next one. Tens of thousands of opposition supporters have marched through Armenian capital to call for resignation of the country's prime minister because of his handling of the conflict with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. In 6 weeks of fierce fighting that ended with a Russia-brokered peace deal on November 10th, the Azeri army reclaimed lands that Armenian forces have held for more than a quarter of a century. Armenia's opposition parties warned the Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, that there would be civil disobedience across the country if he did not resign by midday on Tuesday. Pashinyan had refused to step down, defending the peace agreement as a painful but necessary move that prevented Azerbaijan from overrunning the entire Nagorno-Karabakh region. I can't believe he's still there. Resign. And look, I'm saying this entirely for myself, as I don't understand. Because this goes beyond that. This deal was there prior, or at the very least, he could have made this deal prior. And there are things that he said that was quite provocative that, no, he couldn't necessarily stand up to. It was clear that Azerbaijan had the military. They were working with Turkey. You're standing by yourself. Russia was not going to intervene until or up until the point they hit Armenia, which they weren't going to do because they already knew that Russia wasn't going to intervene up to that point. So if you're Nicole Pashinyan and you're in charge, what do? Don't you have to make some agreement? Don't you have to come to some deal? And he wouldn't accept any of that stuff. None of that stuff was ever on the table. Not to mention these kind of moves towards the West, as if the West was somehow going to jump in to defend him on this. I don't know how he retains power. There was clear anger, clear resentment. The day that this deal was announced, and he was in a bunker when this deal came out, and the anger that was in the crowd. I mean, they beat the Speaker of the House. I mean, the crowd was so angry. So I was shocked that he actually believed he was going to ride this out. That was stunning to me. Let's do this. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. There's one more that I want to do with the Indian protests, because there's a large strike that has been taking place in India to the tune of hundreds of millions. It's utterly astonishing. But let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us the like and share that audio or video. Also, if you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So, over the weekend, there were debates. Now, this is from the runoff elections that are taking place in Georgia. Now, on election night, I made a prognostication, or there was certain prognostications. And Shane, your dad, pushed back on me on that because him and I were, if I'm not mistaken, in the first hour. My prognostication for the longest time had been Biden takes the presidency, Democrats retain the House, and Democrats take the Senate. Now, the way this is broken down is that there are two seats that are up for grabs, both of which are in Georgia. Purdue versus Warnock. Loeffler is going against Ossoff. I think I said that right, or it might be. I think
it's the other way around. I think it's
it.
Loeffler against Warnock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Loeffler versus Warnock, and Purdue versus Ossoff. Great. So we have this situation where these guys are in this runoff. Now, under normal circumstances, Republicans win these runoffs. However, under normal circumstances, Republicans also win Georgia, and that's not true this year. Democrats, Joe Biden, took Georgia. Now, does that also mean that the chance for them to take these two seats, I would imagine, has to also be there this year? Also interesting, Loeffler was accused and did, at the very least, change her tax information, which became a big issue early on. That basically, these guys were briefed on COVID information. They knew how bad COVID was going to be, and all of a sudden you saw tax changes. Now, Loeffler, who acts as if she's just a common businesswoman or just like one of the people who are out there struggling, is basically worth $500 million, her and her husband. So all of this talk about being one of the crowd and everything else is nonsense. Take a listen to this, though. She's asked about whether or not Congress members should be able to trade based on information. Let's hear the clip.
Greg Bluestein, one last question.
Senator, should members of Congress be barred from trading stocks?
Look, what's at stake here in this election is the American dream. That's what's under attack. When they attack me for a lie, a left-wing media lie, conspired with the Democrats by, this is an attack on every single Georgian who gets up every day to work hard to provide a better life for their family, who wants to live the American dream. It's a distraction from the real issues, not the conspiracies in this election. What's at stake is the future of our country, our freedoms to live the American dream, to not be taxed into bankruptcy, to not have to go onto government healthcare, government-run healthcare. They want to take away the healthcare that 180 million Americans rely on through their work. That's why I've introduced a health care plan to make it more affordable, not government-run health care that would bankrupt those that rely on Medicare. And I'm going to continue to fight to keep our country free, to keep our borders secure, and make sure that our communities are safe and secure.
I have no idea what the devil she's talking about. Who wants to get rid of government health care of all those people? I do, yes. There's nobody in government that wants to do that, not in real terms outside of Sanders or something like that, meaning it's not the Democrats. Certainly not Biden. Biden said he would veto Medicare for all. And also, I would like to bring this back to the original question, should Congress members be barred from trading stocks? And the reason this became an issue because Congress members were making a ton of money trading stocks because they had inside information being in Congress. It's also ludicrous to say that trying to pass Medicare for all that ensures each and every American has health care is the same thing as getting rid of people's health care. It's like saying making sure that every kid could go to school by mandating school for everybody, public school, is somehow taking away school. It's nonsense. At the very least, Loeffler, despite giving somewhat of a ridiculous answer, and to be clear, Loeffler, and this is NPR, Loeffler and her husband, who is CEO of a company that owns the New York Stock Exchange, dumped millions of dollars in shares after she attended a closed-door Senate briefing on the coronavirus in January. The couple also picked up investments in companies that have benefited in the pandemic. The details were shared as part of the 2012 law called the Stock Act. The Stock Act stands for Stop Trading Congressional Knowledge, or on congressional knowledge. Those stocks were traded. So all of this stuff, and the fact that she's going into lunacy, nonsense. That, however, is better than Ossoff's opponent, Perdue. Now, Perdue didn't even show up. Listen to this. This was Ossoff debating an empty podium. That should have been Perdue. Let's play the clip.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Russ Spencer, evening anchor for Fox 5 in Atlanta, and you are watching the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series. We are broadcasting from the studio of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta, and we welcome viewers from across the state and the country. This is the runoff debate for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Senator David Perdue of Georgia. The candidates are, in alphabetical order, Democrat Jon Ossoff. He is CEO of Insight TWI, a media production company that investigates corruption, organized crime, and war crimes for international news organizations. Republican David Perdue has served in the U.S. Senate since 2015. Before his election, he sat on the board of 5 major corporations and co-founded Perdue Partners, a global trading company. Senator Perdue declined to participate in this debate and is represented by an empty podium.
There should be things that are red lines. The financial dealings that these guys have been getting involved in should be red lines. They should lose because of that by itself. Understand what I mean when I say this. There should be things where the public looks at and define as that crosses over it. This is not a political thing from the standpoint of parties. This is a thing that boils down to, do I want my politicians trading off of political information in order to get rich? Especially when you have all of these people in the public itself that are suffering, and a bill, stimulus bill, that can't pass. Meaning Congress is going to get its health care, Congress is going to continue to get its paychecks, but Congress has abdicated all responsibility of doing a job to looking out for the interests and the welfare of the American public. Yeah, they should lose their seats for that. And the idea that the guy wouldn't show up for the debate in and of itself should be a failure. If your candidate is there, the other person should be there. It is the responsibility to be there. The American public is looking for these people to represent their interests. And instead of representing their interests, Perdue decided to not face the American public. Loeffler, I give her credit, even though she's giving ridiculous answers and just trying to obfuscate from this point of her corrupt dealings, at least she showed up. But neither of them should win their seats. Personally, I want the Democrats to take the Senate. I want the Democrats to take the Senate only so Joe Biden has no excuse. No, oh, the Republicans stopped me from doing this, or the Republicans stopped me from doing that. I want his failure to be entirely his own, with him having the House and with him having the Senate. And what is going to take place in 2024 would be a reckoning. Meaning if Joe Biden doesn't do the job that America needs him or requires him to do, and instead of using this Republican language of handout and whatnot, this is the public purse. It is your job. And if you don't do it, the public will make you pay, or you will pay for it by the next election, especially in the midterms. More importantly, Nancy Pelosi, master politician Nancy Pelosi, right now is basically saying that yes, I had a $2.2 trillion bill, and no, I would not accept Donald Trump's $1.8 trillion offer, but now that Trump has lost, I'm willing to accept the Republicans' less than $1 trillion offer. Meaning, master politician Pelosi basically is going to accept less than what Trump was offering. The honest reality of it is she's willing to accept less now because her guy won. The American public is going to take a hit, and she's willing to accept that because her guy won. Now, in the same way that I'm saying these Republicans should be held responsible for their failures, for their malaction in regards to the best interests of the American public, for that matter, I would even argue roughing up the law. Just because the law didn't necessarily hold them accountable doesn't mean the public shouldn't. But the public should also hold Pelosi accountable. What does it mean for lefties in this situation where Pelosi needs Speaker of the House and she needs to be voted for Speaker of the House? And are lefties going to give her those votes? And what are you going to get for those votes? At which point does the left finally realize that politics is about leverage? And if you have leverage, you use it in the same way that they use that leverage against you. If Nancy Pelosi needs all of these members to get elected, and you have those members, how many members are part of the Progressive Caucus? What are you going to get for those votes? And if you're not thinking about what you're going to get for those votes, you shouldn't even be in office. You shouldn't even be a politician. And God knows you shouldn't be representing the left. This is the moment where you try to get something out of Pelosi if she wants to be Speaker of the House. There's like a 15-point gap or something. You got the numbers. Are you going to use them? If you want Medicare for all put up as a vote, here's your opportunity. She wants to be Speaker of the House. What do you get for it? In the same way you hold those Republicans accountable, you must hold your own side accountable. And I'm talking specifically to the left. Shane, what do you think? We have about 2-3 minutes. You can push it a little bit. What do you think about this? I mean, ultimately, yes, I think these guys should lose. But I also think Democrats or the left should hold their own people accountable, especially if Pelosi wants to be Speaker of the House. It should not be a perfunctory vote.
Well, two quick points. Just on the base of it, I get what you're saying about the insider trading and the allegations that these stocks were bought, with insider knowledge. Seems pretty credible to me looking at it. Having said that, I understand that, that might sway the election. I don't think it's going to be enough to sway both. So, even if it's 49-51, whatever the case, I still see the Republicans having the majority. Now, here's the other side of it, though, because that's just a matter of prediction, which, I could be wrong, I could be right, whatever. But you're saying you kind of want the Democrats to take the House. You kind of want the Democrats to take the Senate. You want them to take the presidency, all this stuff. On the other side of that, you're saying, I hear your argument, which is you want Biden to have all of that and to do nothing, and you want that to ruin. You want that to, because if he were to do that, that would, in some sense, hopefully dramatically change how people on the left view the Democratic Party. And I get where you're coming from there. But aren't you also concerned about him using that in all sorts of negative ways? If you have a supermajority, if you have all three, get 3 out of 3, isn't that opening up? Don't you want some balance of power? Isn't that sort of what our democracy is built on in some sense? Or are you just viewing this as, how do you view it, Jamarl? We've got maybe a minute before we got to go into a break. What's your take?
I view politics as about getting things accomplished. That's all. This notion of balance of power, no, I don't need that. What I want is the ability to get things accomplished. That's it, pure and simple. And I think if you do that, I think the public will reward you for it. Honestly, if you make sure that the public has food, has money in their pocket, has the ability to do things in economic thing, they will give you the ability to get your Green New Deal or to get your other projects done. You just need to make sure the public is attended to and to make sure they know that you're the one that did it. That's my thought. I don't need the balance stuff. I just want to get things done. Let's take a break.
All right.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I try to be quick. But I thought you were going to respond. Well, we can talk about it at one of the other breaks. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with Ian Shilling.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Ian Shilling. He is a geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger. And you should check out his writing at ian56.blogspot.com. Ian, thank you for being with us this morning. How are you doing? Afternoon, I suppose it is your time. How are you?
Hi, guys. I'm great. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you again for being with us. All right, let's start off with Brexit. After weeks, nay months, nay years of stalled negotiations here, the word, at least in the British press that I've seen, is this Saturday, there was apparently a call between Boris Johnson and the European Union Commissioner, President of the European Union Commission. It seems like there might be some room for progress. This is before the end of the year. This is where do you see this? Do you see this as baseless? Do you think this has some room to grow? What is the deadline there? What deadline are they talking about? Is that a real deadline, or is that another one of these sort of, not fictitious deadlines, but another one of these more or less perfunctory deadlines that just seems to, nothing necessarily has to happen by then. Anyway, Ian, what is your take?
It sounds to me like they're quite close to doing a deal. They are arguing about certain points, and nobody knows what is in the deal because nobody's published what the draft is yet. So nobody could criticize it or analyze it yet. But the two things that the press are discussing at the moment is fishing rights and how much fish the EU boats can catch in British waters, which is fairly trivial. But the main one is who adjudicates any violations of a trade agreement. Right? And the EU want the European courts to decide any violations. But then that just means that the UK has not escaped the EU because the EU will decide what the trade agreement is, right? And what you can and cannot do. Right? And there's other things about what EU regulations the UK would have to follow. I mean, the EU is full of stupid regulations about like how bendy bananas have to be. You can't have straight bananas; they're illegal in the EU. Right? You've got to have big curved ones. Right? If you don't have curved ones, they're illegal. There's all sorts of stupid things in EU regulations, thousands, tens of thousands of them that the UK don't want to have anymore. But if the EU gets their way, then a load of that will still be applied, right? And that's the sort of stuff that wants to be escaped from. So it sounds like they're quite close. As always in these things, they're playing brinkmanship between the two of them, seeing what they can get out of it and not agreeing a deal till the last minute. And that was always going to be the way. I mean, it's not even Christmas yet. I mean, I probably they'll sign a deal between Christmas and New Year or something. And they'll keep going right to the last minute.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. That they're like Boris Johnson's strategy seems brinksmanship, pressure. Get to the very last minute to see if anything is there.
Boris Johnson, it's the EU as well. They're both doing it.
Well, that's true. It's both. That's fair. I mean, the EU is not look, from my standpoint, the EU wanted to teach Britain a lesson. And whatever trade deal they come up with the UK, it has to be worse than being in the UK, just by definition. Otherwise, there's no point in being in the EU.
The EU want to make it a terrible deal for the UK because they want to stop anybody else considering leaving the EU. So, there's lots of other countries that have got EU exit movements. The majority of EU countries have got EU exit movements. I mean, there's Italy and there's France and there's the Netherlands and lots of other countries that might leave, right? So the EU have set out from the beginning to try and make it as difficult as possible for the UK to leave, right? And if they do agree a deal, it will be bad for the UK, right? Because the EU will not agree to any deal that will be beneficial to the UK. They won't. Right, because they want to stop anybody else leaving. The last thing the EU want is for the UK to leave, and then after 3 years, the UK is doing a lot better than EU countries. Right? Because then the EU is just going to collapse. Right? Everybody's doing better outside the EU. What are we doing in it? Right? And the whole thing just collapsed. I mean, the whole EU is totally corrupt. Totally anti-democratic, totally corrupt. So it was. I mean, just like every other place, it's totally owned by corporate
Ian, real quick. You don't think that they want a worse off UK outside of the European Union? Meaning, you don't think that having a UK that's damaged economically adversely affects the European Union? Like, I guess my point is, the European Union has to have some sort of mind that a damaged UK would be a disadvantage for the European Union.
Yeah, but they're not interested in the economic damage that it might do. They're only interested in the politics. They are fanatical zealots about expanding the EU powers, right? That's all they are interested in. They don't care about the standard of living of the people. They don't care about economic damage. They don't care about people's rights. They don't care about anything except EU power. That's all they care about. And centralised government. Ever-increasing centralised government that the EU controls. The EU controls state budgets. They control their laws. They control everything. That's what they're interested in.
So then
this has been going on ever since the EU started. That the EU has gradually been taking more and more power away from state governments. That's what's been happening for the last 60 years.
This has always been the conversation. This has pretty much always been the conversation from the skeptical perspective. That's always been where the conversation. I hear you on that one. Where does I mean, here's the thing then. Where can the UK, in a broad sense, reasonably look if they're trying to get some kind of a resumption of trade policies on a wide level with the EU or outside of the EU? Where can they go? Where can they turn? I know that this has been the sort of standstill that has kept Brexit from coming to pass over recent years in a deeper way. You've described it from the EU's perspective. What do you see as the UK's options over the next year, months, but years going into the future? Yeah.
Well, yeah, the UK is not in a good position. I mean, if Biden gets installed in the White House, it'll be even worse because Biden won't want to do a deal between the US and the UK because he hates the UK. So that'll be bad. At the moment, they're doing Mickey Mouse stuff, right, with small trading partners like Canada. They've just done a deal with Canada. How much of the UK's GDP is reliant on trade with Canada? I don't know, but it's tiny, absolutely tiny. You know, it's massive with the EU, and it's massive with the US, and it's massive with China. But you know, outside those three, it's just Mickey Mouse stuff, isn't it? Right? They're also doing a deal with Japan, I think, right? But I mean, that's all Japan's side because the UK imports Japanese cars and stuff, just like everybody else does, don't they? The Japanese are exporters, so it's all the Japanese way, right? So we don't know, and we also don't know what effect it will have on the City of London. You know, the EU will try and make it difficult for the City of London to trade in the EU. So they will try and make that difficult as well.
What is the political climate there dealing with this from the standpoint of the public? Is the public still? I remember several years ago, the public was like Brexit weary. Every day you look at, there was something on Brexit. You can't necessarily get away from it. I know how we were with Trump. And so it was like this kind of ubiquitous
People just want to end it. They just want it finished. They want it done and dusted. They're fed up, as you say, they're completely fed up with it. They've had this for 4 years constantly, haven't they? Apart from, you know, when COVID started in March and the attention turned to COVID, there was non-stop Brexit for years and years. And people were just fed up with it.
With the political...
over.
In the long term, I mean, again, I kind of want to come back to this because from what you're saying, it seems like the EU has the UK in a bind. Again, looking at this from a skeptical perspective,
it's not actually that way because the UK has a massive trade deficit with the EU. Okay, so the EU exports a lot more to the UK than the UK exports to the EU. Right? So even though there's EU fanatics like Macron and Merkel or whatever, they will come under pressure from their own parties and their own politicians and their own people if there's a bad deal, if there's no deal with the UK or a bad deal with the UK. Because French farmers and wine growers won't be able to sell their wine to the UK without a hefty tariff. BMW and Audi and Volkswagen won't be able to sell their cars to the UK without a hefty tariff, which would, you know, be a real big hit to Merkel's auto industry in Germany. Right? So actually, the UK does have a lot of leverage, right? Because, you know, if all trade stopped between the UK and the EU, it's not going to happen. But if all trade stopped, then the EU would be worse off than the UK. Right? Because the EU exports a lot more, a hell of a lot more to the UK than the other way around. Right?
Here's the thing. So you're describing consumers in the UK.
More, and they're notorious for going on strike and closing their motorways and blockading Paris and whatever else, aren't they? And the Dutch farmers are being the same. They're already having a go. And all the German car
is it politically feasible in the UK to do that? So this is where my mind goes. Is it politically, because that is leverage. The UK is an importing nation from the EU, like you're saying. But the prices of goods would also rise. Certain goods wouldn't be available. And then there was already, you know, going forward, depending on how long this lasts, is that a politically feasible move for Boris Johnson and for the political leadership class in the UK to try to keep doing it? Where do you see that going?
Then the UK would be in a somewhat similar situation to Russia when the US placed all the sanctions on Russia after the Ukraine coup, right? So all the EU and the US placed sanctions on Russia, didn't they? And they couldn't trade, right? There was all tariffs on all sorts of trade. So what did Russia do? Oh, we're going to build more ourselves then, right? And they got Ford to build auto plants somewhere in the middle of Russia. Right? And instead of importing French cheese, they made more of their own, right? So they became more independent, and it actually benefited the Russian economy in the long term. They took a hit, right? Russia took a hit because all this trade stopped, right? And they stopped importing all the agricultural produce, all the food from the EU, and had to go elsewhere. So instead of importing from the EU, they imported it from Turkey or elsewhere.
I hear what you're saying. It's the whole import substitution.
They could import
substitution
food
approach
from
too.
Africa instead of the EU. See,
and
might not be
grow
exactly
more
the
of their
same
own.
thing.
But it depends on how long it takes, and it depends on whether or not you've got the political will, institutionally or whatever, to keep
it does.
Keep it going. To keep the ship of state moving in that direction for that long.
Well, it needs
do you see that, or what do you see?
UK hasn't got any. Russia has, but UK hasn't. Eh?
Yeah. That's the thing. Anyway,
so
we got to go into a break.
Let's take a break. We have about a minute, so it's like kind of an awkward thing. It's not really enough time for a question. I do want to get into vaccines, and I want to get into opposition to Boris Johnson from the standpoint of Starmer. I even want to get into basically the breaking apart of labor. I mean, basically the destruction of labor by them, excommunicating Jeremy Corbyn from the party, if you want to call it that. So, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The voice, or the guest here, is geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger Ian Shilling. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. Don't surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of Washington, D.C. Joining us is Ian Shilling, geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger. You can follow Ian on Twitter at Ian56789 and read his writings at ian56.blogspot.com. Ian, is this the destruction of labor? Is labor finish? Has it basically, self-imploded in this kind of breaking apart and the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, let's be honest. They were attacking Jeremy Corbyn when he was in office. And the people who were under Corbyn were after him, meaning Corbyn had a bunch of backstabbers while he was in office that basically crippled his bid for prime ministership. And now, with this, just hatred, seems like they've gone after him. But it seems like in doing so, they've destroyed the Labour Party. Have they?
Well, the Labour Party is in a very poor position. Boris Johnson has completely destroyed the UK economy and completely screwed up his handling of COVID. And Keir Starmer is not 20 points ahead in the polls. They're level. If Labour and Starmer were any good, Starmer's pushed to destroy the economy even more than Johnson. But if Labour were any good, if they had any decent leadership, they would be 20 points in the polls. It'd be they'd be expecting a landslide next time. But they're level, pretty much. It fluctuates. One's 2 points ahead one month, and one's 2 points behind the next month or whatever. But they're level. But Labour, after complete destruction and complete shambles of Johnson handling COVID, Labour should be bloody miles ahead, and they're not. Right? And there's all splits. There's loads of splits in Labour now between the left-wing Corbyn supporters, the socialists, and the neoliberal Blairite Starmer. Right? So the neoliberal Starmer supporters, all the globalists, they've all got the support of the press, of course, all the media. And Corbyn and all these supporters get smeared all over the place in every little thing that they can find to report on. So,
in a broad sense, how's the British media been reporting this? How have they been painting this? How have the tabloids, how's the British media been painting the what's been going on in the Labour Party?
Corbyn is the most evil person ever lived in human history, apart from perhaps Adolf Hitler and Genghis Khan.
Wow. That's appalling. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is like the least racist guy I've come across.
I know. This is propaganda, isn't it?
It is. I mean, but it's propaganda. Like, they're heaping it on thick. Like, part of me thought, I think I wrote it in chat, this might be the best thing for labor. Now, the reason I say that is in the United States, you have the left-ish, and you have progressives-ish, who basically run behind the Democratic Party. They're, regardless of what the Democratic Party does, what the Democratic Party says about it, the Democratic Party can actively go for Republicans.
Isn't it? It's the same situation. You've got Pelosi, who's a neoliberal corporatist,
that's my point.
protecting oligarchs and mega corporations.
Ian, this exactly gets my point. In the United States, you don't have that break. You don't have a situation where, yes, they may attack the left, they may vilify and everything else, but at the end of the day, the left backs Democrats, and you don't have the split. In the UK, at the very least, you had a direct attack on Corbyn, where they basically kicked him out of the party. Now, anybody that is a Corbyn supporter, anybody that is on the left, anybody that looks at that and sees that for what it is, ideally, you would hope that they would leave and they would try to do something different. And that the Labour Party couldn't win without dealing with that group. That's what I would like to happen. Is that what's in fact happening? Because that's not happening in the United States.
No, it doesn't happen because most people are extremely ignorant about politics. They're not going to learn anything about politics from the mainstream media. The mainstream media's job is to cover up and hide what the facts are of the politics, isn't it? That's what they do. That's their full-time job. All of them, both sides. Don't matter whether it's Fox News or it's CNN. They cover it up, don't they? They're never going to talk about Pelosi's corruption or insider trading or that Sun has got a lucrative deal with a Ukrainian gas company.
It was just, I would hope that people who were backing Corbyn would stick with him. That's all. And if that's 10 million people, that they would go right out there with them.
But I mean, the membership of the Labour Party went up from about 200,000 to 500,000 when Corbyn got elected as leader.
That's my point. That's my point.
More than doubled.
Well, that's my point.
And all those...
If those people went with him, that destroys Labour. Like, how does Ken Starmer ever win again if those people go with him?
There isn't anything organised. There's nothing organised at the moment. There's nothing going on that's organised. They're whinging and moaning about it in various, low-volume alternative media sites, left-wing media sites. But there's no organised plan, no organisation for activism or anything. There's nothing at the moment.
Kind of the same over here. It's pretty similar over here in a lot of ways. I'll be honest. I mean, granted, there's not the same schism going on in the Democrats, of course, which you guys were talking about there. But in terms of what happened with Bernie over the last 4 or 5 years, haven't seen a lot of organization, haven't seen a lot of institution building. Mostly just heard people griping about it.
Yeah, can we talk about the vaccines?
Yeah, go for it. What's your take?
All right. What I would like to say first off is that there is a hell of a lot of disinformation being put out by the mainstream media and governments and so-called health agencies and people like Fauci and Chris Whitty in the UK. Hell of a lot of disinfo, right? And the risks, the really substantial risks of max vaccination programs are being absolutely suppressed by all the establishment. Right? There's 3 articles that people should absolutely read. Right? One is by UK medical practitioners, which goes on all about the risks right? And the potential side effects, and the COVID vaccines aren't going to stop you becoming seriously ill. That's not what they intended to do, right? And it's at UK Med Freedom, so people should definitely read that. And there's another article by Dr. Michael Yeadon and Wolfgang Wodark, which covers a lot of the same ground, but it's got a bit other information. And then there's another article called Why You Should Skip the COVID Vaccine by Mike Whitney, which is excellent, which summarizes both of them. Right? And people should read that 20 minutes, spend 20 minutes reading those 3 articles and then make their own minds up about the vaccines, because these 3 articles will tell them the facts and not the bullshit propaganda that is being pushed 24/7 by the media.
Ian, let's drop that last point, because we on radio, PG-13. Let me ask you this. Let's streamline it for us. What is the reason why people should skip the vaccine?
But they've not been safety tested. It takes 5 years to safety test the vaccine and determine what the medium and long-term side effects might be. These have been rushed through in 8 months, so nobody's got any idea of the safety aspects, what adverse side effects there might be. They have got no idea what the efficacy of these vaccines are. All this bullshit about 90% effective or 95% effective is total bullshit.
No,
right?
Ian,
that is
you can't say that. No, you can't.
Mild
you
symptoms.
You cannot say that word. I'm sorry. The FCC is going to come down on us straight up. We're not allowed to say the word you just said a couple of times there.
All right, sorry. All right, it's complete garbage what they're putting out. Okay.
Well, they're trying to say that the virus. I mean, they're 95 or 90% efficacy. I think they're saying 2 different terms or 2 different injections. Look, on this, I think I agree with you. I have qualms with the idea that they rushed this. It seems like it just happened so fast in comparison with the other vaccines. And everything seemed like it was put under a pressure cooker. Everything seemed like it was rushed. So I agree with you. I have my qualms with this particular vaccine, even though I can't necessarily say that something is wrong with it. The vaccine could be perfectly fine and it could work perfectly well.
Yeah, but the mass vaccination programs are illegal. Actually illegal in a number of different ways. Okay. One is that 99% of people will be at greater risk of adverse health effects from the vaccine than they will from the virus. The virus only significantly affects less than 1% of the population. So vaccinating everybody against it is medical malpractice. Right? And it contravenes first do no harm, because you're now doing more harm to 99% of people that get it. Okay, it violates the Nuremberg Code and human rights law, because informed consent will not be obtained. Informed consent requires that adequate and accurate information on the relative risks and benefits of taking a vaccine or any other medical intervention is explained to the patient, and that will not be done. They will not explain the risks of the adverse side effects.
Okay, but here's the thing, Ian. I get what you're saying about that, but the whole idea is that this thing was pushed through quickly because there's a perception of need, like widespread need.
Yeah, but that's all false as well. That's all false as well. I mean, all these vaccines are being sold on the fear that has been generated in the media and governments that this is some sort of Ebola or the bubonic plague or something. It's nothing like the bubonic plague or Ebola, right? It's got an infection fatality rate of about 0.14%, which is like a severe
but that's
strain.
300,000 people that are going to be dead by Christmas. And in the United States, you're talking about 12 million affected.
That's full.
Well, I mean, those people are really dead. And so it's not like they're pretending to be dead. The hospitals are really being filled. They're not pretending to be filled. The ERs, the ICUs, those things are being filled. Those aren't pretending. The trucks, the refrigerator trucks that are full, where you're having prison inmates being paid X amount of cent to move them, those things they're not faking that, Ian. I mean, you realize those things are real, right?
Most of those people who are recorded as COVID deaths didn't die of COVID. Okay.
How do you know?
90.
I mean, we've had hundreds of thousands of excess deaths. We've had hundreds of thousands of deaths above what you would expect in a given year. At least a couple 100,000. The last statistic I saw was 300,000.
Yeah, but a lot of those have been caused by the lockdowns and lack of medical
what makes you
care.
say that? That doesn't fit. From the statistics I've seen, a lot of the people who died, not only were they diagnosed post-mortem, sure, with COVID, but the symptoms that they had and the way that they died fit with that kind of viral pneumonia-like disease. It's not depression. It's not people killing themselves. It's symptoms that fit with it. So what are you saying?
That's not true. That's not true. Okay. There was a recent study from Johns Hopkins University where somebody analysed the deaths in the US in 2020.
I watched that whole thing. I watched that.
It's widely.
No, that's not. That's Genevieve Briand. So she's an economic scientist at the University of Johns Hopkins. And then somebody wrote not a paper about it. A student wrote in a journal article that was then retracted by Johns Hopkins, but even in their retraction, they linked to the PDF of it. I mean, we should talk about this some other time. With that specific story, I looked at that. I watched the whole presentation. I saw some misinfo coming out about that, and I kind of can't blame them for retracting it, even though I don't think that's, from a scientific perspective or an academic perspective, the right move. Regardless, I don't know. A lot to talk about here. Ian, thank you for being with us.
Okay, thanks.
Those listening, Ian Shilling, geopolitical analyst, researcher, and blogger. You can follow his work, check out his work, ian56.blogspot.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute with headlines.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. This is the last hour of the most disruptive show in the world and the universe. In the multiverse. I love that, in the multiverse. From the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We have altered the working this morning just because my man has a bit of a cold. I'm
sick.
Okay, fair enough. He's sick.
It is a flu. I just had to mute myself while I coughed. Now, this is the second time total that I've coughed, so I'm pretty darn sure that I don't have COVID. Not feeling breathless. I've got mild flu-like symptoms, etc. But I'm not really coughing anyway. It's just
a bit under the weather.
For the theorists out there.
Yeah, just under the weather.
But anyway,
that's
I'm
the
sick.
reason why we've changed it up. It's not going to be this way forever. But let's get to
Tomorrow's
the headlines.
doing headlines.
So, in the news, Sweden has rolled out COVID-19 restrictions after refusing to order a nationwide lockdown and instead largely relying on voluntary measures. Public gatherings are now restricted to 8 people, down from a previous limit of 300. The country also banned the sale of alcohol in bars, restaurants, and nightclubs after 10 p.m. until the end of February. High schools will also switch to virtual learning on Monday for the rest of the term. Anders Tegnell, the nation's top epidemiologist, has repeatedly defended the country's calling for citizens to hold themselves accountable for social distancing instead of closing borders and ordering lockdowns. But Tegnell, who predicted the country could gain herd immunity, acknowledged last month that the Swedes were facing a resurgence of the virus after initially suggesting that a second wave was unlikely. Rudy Giuliani has tested positive for COVID-19. President Donald Trump tweeted on Sunday, quote, Rudy Giuliani, by far the best mayor in history of New York City, and has been working tirelessly exposing the most corrupt election by far in the history of the United States, has tested positive for China virus. Get better soon, Rudy. We will carry on. Trump tweeted enthusiastically. President Trump urged his supporters to vote for Republican Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue to prevent the socialists and communists from gaining control of the United States Senate. Trump said that Perdue's opponent, John Ossoff, and Loeffler's opponent, Reverend Raphael Warnock, are the two most extreme far-left liberal candidates in history. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, President-elect Joe Biden plans to nominate California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to serve as his first Secretary of Health and Human Services. His department would oversee the distribution of COVID-19 vaccine, and he would be tasked with the help of building public trust in that vaccine. Becerra, 62, has served as California's top prosecutor since 2017 when he succeeded now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris in the role. He served in Congress for more than 20 years and was once seen as a potential House Speaker. If confirmed by the United States Senate, Becerra will be the first Latino to hold that role. The Pentagon said Friday it's pulling most of the United States troops out of Somalia on President Donald Trump's orders, continuing a post-election push by the president to shrink the United States' involvement in counter-terrorism missions abroad. Without providing details, the Pentagon said in a short statement that a majority of U.S. troops and assets in Somalia will be withdrawn early 2021. There are currently about 700 troops in the Horn of Africa nation that we know of, training and advising local forces in an extended fight against the extremist group Al-Shabaab, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said on Monday that the United States should reduce its interference in China's domestic affairs and development in order to improve relations between the two countries. Wang also emphasized his hope for cooperation while pointing out ways in which the United States could change its approach. The foreign minister was speaking to a group of U.S. business leaders via video on Monday. President Donald Trump has pushed a tough policy against China using methods such as tariffs and sanctions. President-elect Joe Biden has said he won't immediately remove tariffs, but will aim to work with other countries to put pressure on Beijing. Iran said Monday it was glad the United States, quote, got the message, unquote, and modified its behavior in the Persian Gulf after top U.S. Navy officials in the region said his forces had reached a state of deterrence with Iran after months of regional attacks and seizures at sea. Quote, we're happy that the other party has gotten the message and made its behavior more respectful, unquote, Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatizadeh told reporters. He said the U.S. military is the main source of tension in the region, that Iranian forces have always acted professionally. Quote, unfortunately, the United States has often had an unprofessional approach towards Iran's navy, unquote, he said. He was responding to Vice Admiral Sam Paparo's remarks delivered at a conference in Bahrain on Sunday. Paparo, who oversees Navy's Fifth Fleet and based in Bahrain, said the two sides had reached a state of uneasy deterrence, quote unquote, and that he had a healthy respect for Iran's regular navy and naval forces of its Revolutionary Guard. Shane, do you think it's ever possible for countries to actually make peace? Like, say, for example, the position that the United States is in right now. It wants to maintain a certain degree of, let's take it out of the realm of countries. Let's take it to people. You start off with a group having an advantage. Whether that advantage is technological, meaning for guns or weapons and knives and blades or whatever, or whether that advantage is in numbers, whatever that advantage is, that number or that advantage accentuates itself, and they use it to gain other advantages. So maybe those advantages are advantages in space or in land or in resources or in military equipment, whatever that is. And you grow as a country. Now, from the standpoint of the people inside the country, they want to maintain those advantages, and they feel that those advantages are somehow God-given. That the moment that you get a financial advantage, the moment that you get an advantage, I don't know, maybe in the way that the public perception, you want to maintain it, you want to keep it, you don't want to give it up. And in order for somebody else to level out and to come up in that society, let's talk about African Americans or let's say immigrants, where there is let's say a level between, let's say, normality of citizenship and everything else and the other groups. And in order for those things to level themselves out, one side feels as if it's losing something, even if it doesn't lose something, even if that loss is just a differential advantage. The same thing applies for countries. Is there a way for countries to have win-win relationships that get past this notion of differential advantage? Because it seems that if the countries want to maintain differential advantage, then this is what we get. Meaning everybody's just fighting for whatever they can get because we can never come to any kind of agreement that gets to the bottom where the countries say, okay, fine, let's stop killing, let's stop fighting, let's stop having these wars, we're sick of it, and let's do something else. How do we get there? And is it even possible under our current model of thinking?
It is not possible under our current model of thinking, at least when you use, a certain definition of the word "are." If you're talking about certain branches within the United States government, definitely it's not possible. They got to change their thinking. Peace is possible. That's the question you're asking. Frankly, I think this is one of those things where we live in a country that is so constantly at war that we're like, will it ever stop raining?
Right.
If you live in Seattle or a place like that, will it ever stop raining? Well, of course it does. Spring comes, summer comes, and eventually it stops raining. And eventually, peace comes too, intentionally. I don't think that peace is accidental. I think, peace is often harder to maintain than a war is to start, which is why peace is relatively rare these days. Peace is possible. And historically, that happens through things like trade. You have some degree of ethnic affiliation so that people don't want to fight each other. You have diplomacy on the high level. There are all these ways in which that can happen. Of course, what we and our guests will frequently bring up is that the military-industrial complex is profitable.
It is.
And we have a lot of folks in our government and associated with it who are invested in that, invested in the profits from that. So,
also, let's be clear, that dovetails people with these kind of geopolitical aspirations, people who want to play masters of the world, where they believe that the United States, for the most part, has a role in the world as the indispensable nation, and that's in their heads. You know what I mean? They fully believe it. And they believe that once they become president or once they get into Congress, they have this ability or this almost God-given responsibility to maintain that. And that gets scary because, it's what do you do? And what do you justify to maintain a particular station that you may just lose just from the momentum of the way our lives are going? I agree with you. Not with our current consciousness. I don't think it is. And I don't mean that just for the U.S. I mean that for the countries around the world. Tens of thousands of opposition supporters have marched through Armenian capital to call for the resignation of the country's Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, because of his handling of the conflict with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. And 6 weeks of fierce fighting that ended with a Russia-brokered peace deal on November 10th, the Azeri army reclaimed lands that the Armenian forces have held for more than a quarter of a century. Armenia's opposition parties warned the Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, that there would be civil disobedience across the country if he does not resign by midday on Tuesday. Pashinyan has refused to step down, defending the peace agreement as a painful but necessary move that prevented Azerbaijan from overrunning the entire Nagorno-Karabakh region. It was necessary, whether or not it needed to be at that point. Meaning, if he could have gotten a deal earlier, he should have gotten it. And the country is angry, to put it mildly. Tens of thousands of farmers manned barricades and blocked highways Friday around India's capital of New Delhi for the 9th straight day, protesting new agricultural laws that they fear may hurt their already meager profits. Passed in September, 3 new laws aim to deregulate India's agriculture by encouraging farmers to sell directly to companies. The government has long been a middleman guaranteeing minimal prices for certain crops. The law says that farmers will still have price assurance, but the language is vague and farmers are nervous about losing government support. Talks between union representatives and government officials broke down Thursday night, and more talks are scheduled Saturday. If I'm not mistaken, we're talking about millions of people involved in this. And look, why wouldn't they be upset? A corporation is going to try to max out their profits. That's not the same modus operandi of the government. And so if the government is there to preserve a certain amount of profits, then the government is basically abdicating that responsibility and is deregulating that industry. Well, I know what happened to the U.S. industries when they were deregulated, right? I know what happened to telecommunications. I know when a company gets into a particular process and says, we need to maximize our profits, and one of the ways of doing that is by cutting the amount that we're paying somebody. I don't think those farmers are insane at all for having this protest. I think they know exactly what's going to come up, and they're responding to their environment. Good for them. Violence broke out in Paris for the second consecutive weekend as protesters clashed with police during demonstrations over a proposed security law. Hundreds of rallies were planned across the nation Saturday to protest legislation that would make it illegal to record video or take photos of police with obvious intention to harm their physical and psychological integrity, whatever that means. That law came under harsh criticism as a threat to freedom of the press and was seen as a way to undermine efforts to document police brutality. Any offender could face up to a year in prison and a fine of up to 45,000 euros, which is $54,000, give or take. The situation intensified after 3 white police officers a week earlier were captured on video beating a black music producer. 4 officers were charged in connection with the incident. Wow. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We didn't get to the chance to get to the one with the Japanese capsule returned to Earth on Saturday carrying a special delivery, first rock samples from beneath the surface of an asteroid. There's also the picture of China, who left their flag on the moon and apparently released a picture of that flag. 2 steps for mankind. It makes me proud as a human being that we're taking these steps. What do you think, Shane? All right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I had to bring my I had to bring my mic mute button back up.
No,
absolutely. No, this is exciting, man. I mean, here one of the most exhilarating moments I had over the weekend, just briefly, is there's videos. This is not the same run, but videos of looking at the booster rockets from SpaceX returning to land and just seeing these, like within 20, 30, 40 seconds, something like that, seeing these little silvery strands of light coming down from the sky, and they get closer and closer, and there are 2 of them, and you see pretty soon that they're rockets, and they land, and it's just like this, I don't know, gymnastic ballet sort of thing with propellant and who knows how many hundreds of thousands of pounds of force being deployed, but it seems so gentle from so far away, and it's just incredible.
Beautiful
to think
to watch.
That. What'd you say?
No, I just say it's beautiful to watch. I mean, like,
it is.
Whether it's taking off, like the arc that it makes in space. Oh, it's so beautiful. Like when it goes up in the air and it's like this light, a beam of light. And like you said, when it comes down and it's this gentle, but you know all of the equations, you know all of the math, you know everything that can go wrong, all of the propellant, and all of the stuff has to work. And all of those astronauts are putting their life on the line for logic. That's all it is. It's logic. It's ingenuity and logic. The math and the consciousness of the individual when they came up with X or Y, and then they put it into physical reality. And those pilots are basically dependent upon that logic, that ingenuity, to keep them alive as they pursue those aims. Oh, it's fascinating.
It is. It is. Yeah, it is. I think there's something to, we've got to go into a break. I think there's something to this aim to keep space reserved for peace-oriented ends, fitting back into that conversation we were having just a few minutes ago. There's something about going up to the sky, like literally trying to ascend to what, historically people saw as the heavens, this place of divinity. There's really something to it. Yeah, and having that as a pursuit, having that as an orienting goal, it's a beautiful thing, man. Anyway, we've got to go into a break. We will be back on the other side of this break with Kim Iversen. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global political and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunday, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, give us a like and definitely share that audio or video. If you want to join in with the conversation, you are absolutely welcome to do so. In fact, you're encouraged. You can send a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. But joining us, one of my favorite guests, we always have a good interaction, independent journalist and host of the Kim Iversen Show on YouTube. We have Kim Iversen. Kim, welcome back to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Good morning. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
I did. It was small, obviously, because everybody was socially distancing, but it was a good Thanksgiving. I spent it with my boyfriend and his parents and grandmother, so we had the five of us got together, and that was it.
Very cool. Oh, that sounds so cool. My wife and I basically spent it here, and my wife cooked like the family was coming over. Oh man, she did it up. We had a great Thanksgiving, quiet, just by ourselves, and it felt like a home. We had two dogs. One of our dogs just died, Bo, and apparently he had cancer once this year. Apparently ate a bunch of gloves, had to have stomach surgery. Then once again, his stomach was, apparently they said he had perforated stomach. I mean, all of the stuff was going on with him that we didn't know about. He was ill, he was sick. And so he lived up until Thanksgiving, but this was basically his last Thanksgiving. And so we kind of had this home thing.
It's so sad. And it's that just happened to my dad. My dad's, my dad is the one who introduced me to your show, Jamarl, but my dad was a big fan. He's one of your earliest subscribers. I think he was like literally in the first 100.
Oh, no way. No way. That's so cool.
Oh, yeah. He'd been watching you forever, and he'd walk around the house. It was so funny because you'd open up your show and you'd say, hello, everyone. And he would walk around the house and he would say that all the time. Like he just loved watching your show. He watched it as much as you posted. But anyway, his dog just passed away also just last Monday. And I actually flew up to Idaho to be there with him as that was happening because my dad lives alone. He's just had this dog for a long time.
It is very painful.
It was really
it is very painful.
Cancer.
You watch him grow.
Yeah.
Like you watch him grow and develop. And, Bo, we got him as a rescue. And so it's like, it's this weird, it's very strange to me. I don't know why I like the dog. I don't know why I cared that it was happy. All things being equal, if I wanted to travel, that became somewhat of a difficult thing to do because of it. And yet, I wouldn't have changed it. It's like I can't necessarily logically place what it is that I care about, and yet it's there nonetheless. It's very strange.
We love our pets. We love our pets.
We love our pets. They become family members, honestly. So let's get into the show because we're talking about sad stuff, and the dog thing's pretty bad. So I wanted to ask you this. The vaccine, these guys are talking about putting a vaccine out, but you don't believe that this is going to really change anything. So if the vaccine came out, let's say in the way that Fauci is talking about, where you're talking about like hundreds of millions of doses by, let's say, February of next year, do you think that would be enough to, let's say, fix all of this? Or basically, is the damage done? Those businesses that have closed are closed. They're, well, like 40% of them are closed for good. The people that have lost their jobs, well, those jobs, clearly, if the businesses are closed, then the jobs are gone. Like, basically, that the damage that have been done to the society is done. Whether the vaccine comes secondary is almost after the fact. Or do you believe that the vaccine does have promise in regards to the way it changes things?
No, I mean, I think, I definitely think that the damage has been done. You know, there's already enough, like you said, job loss and businesses going under. But, you know, that could always get worse. So it's best to try to stop it as, you know, and try to mitigate and rescue, I think, what we have left. I mean, if they continue to keep this closed, let's say for the next 2 or 3 years, that would obviously cause even more damage. I don't think that they would really be able to do that, though. My issue with the vaccine is that they're saying they don't know enough about this vaccine in order for them to reopen the economy. So even if they gave all of us the shot, or, you know, obviously, they can't even give it to all of us, right? So they're rolling it out. And as they start rolling it out in February, they say that they don't know enough about this vaccine to then reopen. They don't know. They're saying that we're still going to have to socially distance. We're still going to have to wear masks. And my guess is we're still going to have to remain closed because cases will potentially continue to rise and hospitalizations might continue because they just haven't tested this vaccine. They never gave it to any children, so they don't know. So they're not going to give it to any kids, which was, you know, why did we close down schools then? And will schools be able to open back up if children are not able to get this shot? So then wouldn't kids still be spreading it all amongst themselves? They did not test it on anybody who was severely compromised, which are the majority of the people who are passing away. They didn't test it on that. They did test it on older people. So they tested it on people above the age of 65, but none of those people were really in bad shape. So, and just because you're over the age of 65 does not mean this virus is deadly for you. For the majority of people over the age of 65, it isn't deadly for them. So that's the group they tested it on. They don't know. So they didn't test those two groups. They didn't test whether or not this vaccine actually stops you from getting the virus. And now that's some vaccines, that's kind of normal. But what they don't know specifically is whether or not you could still be a carrier of this virus, even though you're not feeling sick. All they know is that this medicine that they're going to administer, this vaccine, stops you from feeling sick, but they don't even know for how long. So they don't know, is this something you're going to have to do every 4 months? Is this something that will work forever? They just don't know. And that unknown, because they don't know the effectiveness of this vaccine, they don't know if it means you can still spread it, the virus around to your elderly grandmother. You know, let's say you've got a grandma, she's 90. You don't think she can take the shot because it wasn't tested on people in her situation. So you take it and then you think, okay, well, good, then I can go be around grandma. Not so fast. They're saying you still might be a carrier of the virus and you might give it to your grandma. So the fact is they don't know. And because they don't know, that's the problem. The unknown has been the problem, which is why they've said, now go home and stay home and don't ever come out because of the great unknown that's out there. So no, this vaccine, especially the first, we're going to get a bit of a reprieve in the summer. We saw that to be the case, that the weather does have some impact on the virus. So the summertime will come around and there's going to be, where there's a lot more ventilation and people spending time outside, people will have a bit more freedom. But come fall again, we just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's the scary part. How many of us will be inoculated by then? Will they, they might say in the fall, look, we just don't know. So everybody go back, stay home.
How about this? Do you think that by that point, by this coming fall, about a little bit less than a year from now, we will know? In other words, we'll know whether or not if you've gotten the vaccine, if you'll be able to spread it to folks. We'll know if that, what the impact there is. We'll know what the consequences of taking the vaccine are on folks who have, some of these serious illnesses or comorbidities. In other words, by the point that we'd be seeing another sharp spike, just holding to that seasonal pattern, we will have the knowledge. What's your perspective on that? Do you think that's going to happen, or do you think it's going to be slow? Do you think we're just going to be in this sort of constant state of information limbo and uncertainty? Kim, what's your take?
I think the virus has, if you look at actually the areas right now that are spiking, you'll see that it is the northern, from Idaho over to Wisconsin and it down in the Dakotas a bit, going down towards to about Colorado. That's like the real area, the northern middle, mid-north area is what's really spiking. And that's because they didn't get it last spring and they didn't get it in the summer. When you look at the areas of the country that were spiking last spring, New York, the Northeast and even Northwest, Seattle area and those areas, they're not spiking now. They're not seeing the big cases. The Sun Belt, which got it more in the summertime because they're the ones that were blasting their air conditioning in the summertime and not going outside, Arizona, Florida, all through Texas, all that area, they're not. Now, they didn't get it as bad as the Northeast got it in the spring. So they're still getting more cases right now, but it's not as many as in other areas. And so I think the virus is going through and just doing what viruses do, which is spread naturally. And by the time next fall comes around, the virus would have we already would have a level of herd immunity anyway. So I think that, people will say, oh, it was the vaccine that did it. But I don't know how much truth there is to that. I think it's just that
I hear you.
We're not, like New York's not spiking. So what's the deal?
I hear. Okay, so I want to take us into a break, but when we come back, I want to hear what you have to say on excess deaths. So I watched a video of yours a little while back. I thought that was a good video. Basically, your take. I'll let you explain it, but your take is the CDC when they use the term excess deaths, it's not what you'd think it is. So some of those deaths, not all of them, from your reporting, not even close to all of them, but a substantial minority of the 300,000, I think it was last I checked, the 300,000 excess deaths we've seen in 2020, a substantial minority of those can be accounted for in other ways than COVID. Anyway, I thought you did a great take on that. I want to hear more about that from you on the other side of this break. You're listening to Kim Iversen. She's an independent journalist and host of The Kim Iversen Show on YouTube. And you're also listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back on the other side of this break.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you're also listening to Kim Iversen, independent journalist and host of The Kim Iversen Show on YouTube. Kim, I was before we went into the break, I was asking you about this excess death count. And I thought you had a good piece on how the number of excess deaths is actually, I'll let you explain it, but actually based on like this 5-year running average, because the U.S. population is consistently growing, because people are getting older for a couple of reasons. There are always, literally every year, there are always a certain amount of excess deaths. Could you get into that for a minute, Kim?
Yeah, so we keep hearing about all these excess deaths in the news, and it got me curious. And my question was, are there always excess deaths every year, or is this just an anomaly? And when I went and did the research, it turns out that now when you and I say excess deaths, it means one thing when you and I are talking, because we're normal non-scientist people. It means something to us, and that means death that we didn't expect, right? It's unexpected death. when scientists use the term excess deaths, it turns out that that's a normal term that they use every year. And there's interestingly an expected level of excess deaths every single year. And that is what when I looked back at, I found out that every single year there's at least 100,000 excess deaths. And that is, and they, every year. So this is not because of some tragedy, not because of some virus. It's not because of anything. It's just that when they use the term excess deaths, I don't know why they even use that term. It's a little misleading to the normal, average person, but that's what they use. They're scientists, whatever. So what they do is they say, okay, for the last 5 years, let's look at the total death count in the United States for the last 5 years. So let's say last year, I think it was 2.8 million people died. The year before that, it was like 2.7. The year before that, 2.6. The year before that, right? So they look at those 5 years. And because the U.S. population grows year after year after year, and because baby boomers are getting older, we see more and more deaths year after year after year. They call that excess death, but it's not unexpected excess death. So what they do is they take the last 5 years, which 5 years ago when the population was a lot lower and when baby boomers were younger, we saw way fewer deaths 5 years ago. And 4 years ago, we saw even, maybe a little more, but still less. And 3 years ago, they take those 5 years, those hard numbers, and they add them together, they divide it by 5, and they say, okay, that number is the number we're using. And so from there, what we're going to do is anything above that number, we're going to call excess death. And that's not unique to this year. That's not some COVID conspiracy. I want to make that clear. That's just what they do every year. It's how they do it. So year after year. So, of course, if last year there was 2.8 million deaths, and if the year before there was 2.7 million deaths, and the year before there was 2.5 million deaths, and it kind of goes on and on like this, of course, that number that they end up with when you average those numbers together is going to be lower than what we will see, of course, this year. So that, and it usually, though, is about 100,000. We should see year after year, roughly 100,000 deaths on top of the number we saw from last year. But according to some health experts, that number they project actually between, and not virus related, they project between now and 2050 that our death rate is only going to increase. And I don't know exactly why they think that. I think because of the baby boomer population getting older, they believe between now and 2050, our death rate itself is going to get higher and higher and higher. So we should be seeing, even more deaths, not virus related, but just naturally year after year after year. We do have excess deaths this year that are beyond the normal expected excess deaths. So I do believe the virus is real. I don't think it's a hoax. I do think people are dying from it. But I do think that number we're seeing, you do have to subtract a bit from it.
Well, you have to subtract 100,000 from it. But that still leaves 200,000. That's still a pretty decent number.
Right. Yeah. Look, the virus has held true from the beginning what many epidemiologists have thought from the beginning, which is it's 3 times deadlier than the flu. Yeah. And we normally see, let's say 60, 70, anywhere from 40 to 80,000 flu deaths a year, depending on the strain. So you multiply that 80 by 3, and that's what you should expect.
The other thing
let's get into. Go for it, Jamarl.
Well, I was going to say the other thing about this that gets me is mutations. Like viruses mutate. Like, so even if you did get the vaccine, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are covered. I mean, they've already talked about that there are multiple strains of the virus. And then the question becomes, is there a wide berth in regards to immunity from it, where any new strain it also inhibits or doesn't make that new strain worse? I mean, not worse, but a little bit lighter as opposed to some of the major symptoms that the individual will get, especially the cognitive symptoms that they're seeing after COVID. Do you know anything about immunity from that standpoint, like the mutations and so forth, and how they're expecting the vaccine to interact with a mutated strain of itself?
Yeah, I think there's kind of thinking like what you just said. I think that many of the experts are expecting that this will be kind of like the flu, where year after year, they're going to have to maybe manipulate the vaccine to try to make it more, that this virus does seem to mutate quickly, but they don't think it mutates as quickly as the flu. So it might not be something that they have to shift every year. It could be something that maybe every 2 or 3. They don't really know. Obviously it's a new virus. That's kind of the point. So the issue is, though, I think with the flu is the vaccine does seem to last in our system a little bit longer than what they think this vaccine might only last. I mean, many of the experts are saying they think it might only last 4 months. They don't know. But 4 months seems to be the marker because a person who catches the virus, their antibodies seem to only last that long.
If it's cool, let's turn to Sweden for a minute, because we've gone back and forth on this over the many months at this point that the virus has been in full swing, and even from the earlier days. Anders Tegnell over the weekend, basically, a bit before this weekend, had said that the herd immunity approach in Sweden didn't seem to be working as they thought it would. And then this weekend, Sweden started to implement wider lockdowns, limiting parties, event sizes to under 8 people, that kind of thing, basically taking steps they hadn't previously taken. This is as we're going into cold and flu season, for the first time in the full swing of this virus. So that would affect that. But again, Tegnell sort of saying that the herd immunity approach doesn't seem to have worked so far. That seems like a pretty sharp indictment of that approach in general. It seems like every country that I know of, at least, that has taken that approach has now had to walk back from that. How do you think, first of all, Kim, do you think this is being accurately reported? What do you think about what's going on? And then furthermore, how do you see that affecting how any nation, any country in 2021 chooses to deal with the virus?
So I think that's being a little bit misreported. Anders Tegnell hasn't really said that. He hasn't said, it didn't work. If you actually read the news in Swedish and then translate it using Google Translate, which is how I try to read all my news, all he's actually said was, we hoped for more immunity than we had. When they went back and did serology testing, they didn't find as many antibodies. But he's also said that might not matter. And that's what the experts now are saying about this vaccine is, the antibodies might only last 4 months, but it might not matter really because your T cells might have developed a memory that, yes, it's not detectable, but it still does help you fight the virus. That's what Tegnell has said. And yes, they have limited public gatherings to 8, meaning if you're at a restaurant, you can't sit with more than 8 people at your table. They have not done any other restrictions beyond that. They still don't wear masks in Sweden. They still do not limit anything in your private home. They have not said limit your gatherings or parties inside your house. They said that's your private space. Do whatever you want. They've just limited publicly 8. You can't gather in a group of more than 8 people together. If you look at Sweden's curve, now Sweden, when you look at the data, the Worldometer's data, they in the spring or the end of spring, they were riding at about 15th in the world with death rates per million. And they were right where we were, the United States. We were right also at about 15th. Italy, the UK, and Sweden, we were all kind of hovering together. And people say, see, look, it didn't work. Sweden is now ranked at like 22 or 23 in the world. And meanwhile, we've all moved up to the top 10. So if you look at their curve, their death curve, now they've got more tests. Every country, I don't look at testing rates for the actual virus because every country's ramped that up. So it's hard to say. But if you look at the actual death rates and hospitalizations, Sweden is down. They're seeing an increase and they're trying to prevent, some catastrophe. So they're saying, okay, don't get together with more than 8 people. But they still are seeing, they're not seeing the curve that even their neighbors are seeing. Germany is on the rise. Denmark is on the rise. Areas that were able to effectively lock it down earlier are now on the rise, whereas Sweden's curve is lower than it was in the spring. So I think it is showing that there is some level of natural herd immunity, and that should be encouraging to people. Even if we don't have antibodies in our system, if our body just learns to fight this sucker off, that's a good thing. So I still don't see Sweden as a disaster. If anything, even if you say, okay, Sweden's not a success, they just at least prove that all of these efforts we've implemented should be questioned on how effective they actually were.
Well, the areas with masks did far better than the areas that didn't. I mean, I've seen research as recent as like a couple of days ago on this that showed that the masks were working. And I got to be honest, the Sweden thing is an indictment. Come on, call it what it is. They've gone from 300 gathering to like 8. And even if they're not necessarily wearing masks, Sweden may be different than New York, meaning from standpoint of density, or Germany, or, like let's say the UK. Like there may be certain areas in other countries that are far more dense, which up the numbers. Fair enough. But I have to be honest, this seems like a repudiation of their previous policy. If they really thought that because if they really thought that the previous policy worked, then they wouldn't be using this new policy to deal with what they consider to be an upswell. They could just go with the previous old policy that supposedly worked.
But their policy has only been all this whole time that they're not allowed as the government to invade on you as a person, on your liberty. So they've said all they're going to do is have their epidemiologists, which I don't know of any other country in the world that is their leaders have stepped aside for just the scientists. The scientist, Egner, this guy Tegnell is not a politician. He's just a scientist, yet we all know his name. We don't have that anywhere else in the world except here in the United States with Fauci. But other than that, they've said in Sweden, all we're going to do is we're just going to listen to the science. And they've just continued to say to issue recommendations. And that has been their whole strategy this whole time, which is we're just going to recommend. And they've said we're not going to limit you to the point where it's unsustainable. And they've had a very sustainable strategy. They are not panicking. They're not closing down. They're not. Their children are still healthy and happy and going to school and socializing.
Actually, their children are not. The children are doing virtual learning. That was the other thing.
Only over the age of 16, but they've done that the whole time also. That was something they did in the very beginning. If you're over the age of 16 and college students, they have them stay home because they can take care of themselves. Anybody under the age of 16 still go to school. They've always done that. So
fair enough. You're fighting hard. You're fighting hard for Sweden, and I'm not sure why you're fighting so hard for Sweden.
Because it's a sustainable strategy. I don't think anybody could have had a success when it comes to a virus that's naturally coming around, and Mother Nature's job is to off us.
Well, I agree, but come on. But there were states that did better than others. I mean, New York, when it first started, did abysmal as compared to like California. Like if you did a comparison between, let's say, Los Angeles and New York, there was a difference in the way that they came out with their strategies, in the way that they were reading or watching science. What's his name?
I know we were the first. Whoa. Hold on here. I'm in California. Let me tell you, we were the first to lock down, and we've never opened back up. And
no. I guess what I'm saying is California initially did better than New York in the start when they compared the two states.
And we're still in the same situation. I mean, we're still in a lockdown. We're in the harshest lockdown now of the country.
You guys are
as of today, as of right now.
That is true. I mean, look, it's a fascinating conversation. But it was funny when you first came on. Shane was like, "Make sure we got to ask about Sweden." It was like, yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Well, it's because it was in our headlines, and we had you, and then we had Ian Shilling, both of whom are guests we've gone back and forth on with this issue. And I don't think we got to. I might be misremembering, but I don't think we got to Sweden with Ian. And I wanted to make sure we got to it with you. And good conversation. I like going back and forth. Kim, thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. You guys are always so fun. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Hey, you too. Yeah, it's always great. For those listening, Kim Iversen is an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iversen Show on YouTube. Check that out, youtube.com/Kim Iversen. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in just a minute. We are taking calls on the other side of this break. The phone number is 202-521-1320 or 202-521-1320. Two different ways of saying the same thing. We'll be back in a minute. Be back on the other side.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And again, we are taking your calls. The phone number is 202-521-1320 or 202-521-1320. I don't know why I always feel the need to stress that there are two different ways of saying it. I guess just to add some variation in there. Anyway, we are taking your calls, 202-521-1320. We have Malik calling in from D.C. Malik, you're on the line. What's on your mind, man?
Good morning, fellas. And I want to preface this, as I've prefaced it in the past. I like you guys. I enjoy your show, and respect the way that you do your job. We can always disagree and respectfully disagree. I wanted to use an example. One of my part-time hustles is driving for Uber. And I had a young black man in the car who was wearing a face mask with the American flag on it. Now, I wanted to talk to this young man, but, he was on his way to work and he was trying to get some sleep. Because my generation would have never worn anything with the American flag on it. Young black men. I came from a generation that was, even if we were unstudied, we were revolutionary in our orientation. The music we listened to spoke to that culture. Again, even if we were actually politically uneducated. And so when I deliver this critique, it is from a loving place, from a revolutionary standpoint, and we believe in criticism and self-criticism. But what I said to Jamarl the other day, when I say he can entertain things such as life on other worlds, but not that America's government is completely and utterly corrupt to its core, and likely being run by individuals who we have no idea who they are and what their aims are. And the pushback that you guys are getting from an older generation who probably is a little bit more distrusting of the state than you are. And I have to deliver criticism, guys. You come off a lot of times as being in support of the state, a corrupt state. And I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Thank you for the chance. Interesting. I mean, here's the thing.
This example, like you can't just say, okay, I believe this, and then you guys figure out the examples that I have in my head.
Well, okay, absolutely. Right after the election, you had a gentleman on who was, in essence, saying that the system itself is entirely so corrupt and so broken that the only solution would be a revolutionary overthrow. Not necessarily violent, but a revolutionary overthrow. And
I think this might have been Tim Canova. Exactly. Anyway, Malik.
And you've had other guests, and actually you had a guest on today who was pushing back pretty hard in terms of the current popular narrative of corporate media around this pathogen.
You mean Ian?
And there are a lot. Right, Ian. Exactly.
Ian got crushed by Shane earlier today.
I'm sorry?
Ian got crushed.
I don't know about that.
He got crushed.
I don't know about that.
Is that who you're basically like? I guess my thought is, you can have an opinion of us. You can have an opinion of the show. Those are just your opinions, right? The moment that opinion comes in contact with actual reality, then we have a conversation. You're basically saying that A, we don't believe that the government is so corrupt. Now it depends on what you mean by how corrupt. And I don't, and I got to be honest, I don't even entirely know what that means. Yes, we believe that there should be some kind of political revolution. What that means, I don't know. How that looks, I don't know. Do we believe it? Yes. I don't think either one of us have deviated from that particular point. I think the thing is,
so my question is, how can you believe that, and I put this question to friends of mine recently who their line is they don't trust the government. They believe the government political line is to neutralize black people, but at the same time, in the same breath, they will trust everything that the state puts forward in terms of the coronavirus, and that everything about this lockdown is completely legitimate and necessary.
I mean, but how do you think the lockdown?
It is a schizophrenic political position.
It is not a schizophrenic political position.
I want to
put it this way.
I want to step in for a
Just
second.
because the state comes out with something, whatever that is, so let's say a narrative, doesn't by definition mean it's wrong. You get that, right? Like, there could be a situation, I don't care. This is like saying, you want the troops out of Syria, but Bashar al-Assad wants the troops out of Syria, so you must be backing Assad. I mean, that's the same logic. Let's be honest. Just because something happens and the state says this thing happened, and I come around and says, yeah, they're right, I believe it. All of these people died, yes, I believe it. I do think the masks are something that works. And your response is because I take a medical point of view of this, that I'm somehow beholden to the state. I think that's ludicrous. I mean, am I wrong in this, Shane?
I mean, I've said a couple of times, and I don't want to get caught in the defensive trap where you're just like, well, I've said this and I've said that and blah blah blah. But I've said a couple of times that I don't know that I agree with how the lockdowns have been handled, and that from the beginning, if we had handled things differently before the virus, came into being, before anybody was aware of it, before it was a glimmer in the eye of whatever horrible deity creates viruses and spews them out on the world, that we should have handled this differently. And that arguably the way that we did the lockdowns, even the whole process of doing a lockdown in a lot of these cases, is not the way to do it. Specifically, I mean, again, we could get into this one specific issue. In a broad sense, Malik, I think we push back pretty consistently on what not just the American state does, but what any state is liable to do. And I hear what you're saying about distrusting and how the older generations might have a little bit more reason to distrust the governments in general. But with, you're going to have to talk about in different ways about different issues. With the coronavirus specifically, I'll be honest, China and Russia were the first states to pull back and respond very severely. This was back in, January, late January, early February, where China started to do crazy lockdowns in Wuhan, and Russia closed down its entire border, a long, long border with China. And I saw that happening. I was like, okay, this is pretty serious. And what that also tells you is that it's not restricted to some Western-leaning media propaganda complex, like so many stories unfortunately are, which means I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to a wide variety of countries, each of which has an establishment that seems to be telling us that this thing has gone terribly. I guess I don't, unless the allegation is that you have a literally worldwide propagandistic conspiracy where every government around the world, including some of the main foes of the West, are in on it and have been from day one, literally. I don't know where you go with, and I'm not saying that's where you're taking it. I'm not saying that you're saying that it doesn't exist or anything like that, or that it's been stewarded and steered from the beginning. But the other way of looking at this is I don't know what choice I have but to trust these establishments. It's not like we have auxiliary alternative, medical establishments that can give me the numbers in the way that the CDC, for instance, does. They just give me their numbers. And it's unlike a lot of other conspiracies that happen. For instance, there are false flags. The CIA has done false flags before. But those are sort of small, coordinated groups that can work seamlessly with the media in a sort of small, coordinated fashion to seed stories and to create narratives and to create propaganda, basically. What you'd have to have for this to be that case is like top to bottom, up and down across the board control. And I think those are implausible broadly.
It's like
I think
fake refrigerator trucks, fake ICU visits, fake. How far?
And in non-Western countries.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I also don't want to, because that might be a straw man. I'm not saying that that's what you think necessarily, Malachi, but I also don't know exactly what you're criticizing. And so I'm sort of defending it against criticisms that I've heard that have seemed off base to me. But anyway, Malik, you still there?
I'm here. I know you have other callers, and I want to hop off. I would just say that the same thing that one of your last guests said. There was a point at which the CDC was saying that had actually admitted that within the numbers that they put forward were other deaths. meaning deaths from asthma, bronchitis, lung cancer, and even the flu, which we very rarely hear statistics on those diseases anymore.
Those were comorbidities. Those were things that were in addition to COVID. Like, so I have kidney failure. I've mentioned it before. If I get COVID, I die. And then they're going to say, okay, well, you got COVID. Here's the kidney failure stuff. Now, it may have precipitated something else. It might have caused a heart attack. It might have caused some kind of inflammation in my lungs that caused me to... But it's still COVID. I mean, come on. I feel you, but it seems like you're just... I don't know. This seems like a criticism that's struggling to be made, that's taking Herculean effort to make. You're basically saying that because we're taking a perspective and we're taking the point of view of saying, yeah, we believe that COVID is a real thing. And we believe that, I believe at least that the masks work, especially from my upbringing in the medical stuff. Yeah, of course I believe that the medical stuff is what it is. That somehow we're taking a status point of view because of that. I think that's ludicrous. You can believe, like Noam Chomsky said, just because you believe something that somebody else believes that you don't particularly like, well, if it's true, then it's true. I don't necessarily care who else believes it. I don't buy this argument, man. I mean, you need better examples or more examples than this one to make this case.
1 minute.
Regardless, Malik, thank you for the pushback, and thank you for the respectful way in which you did that. And I don't want to, just because we're disagreeing, we're going to disagree in whatever ways we do, but I appreciate it. Tarif, I'm sorry we did not have time to get to you. We've got to close the show out basically now. We got caught up in that conversation. But please call in tomorrow, buddy. In any event, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you producers Cameron and Raheem for producing the show. Thank you, Andre, for engineering this show. Thank you to our guests, starting off with Garland Nixon, live from Venezuela, and talking to Elijiah Magnier, and talking to Ian Shilling, then Kim Iversen. Thank you all for showing up this morning. And thank you again, that is you, Jamarl Thomas, my co-host, for co-hosting the show with me. Hope everybody has a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow. Signing off, Fault Lines.
Another one is in the books, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, Malik, man, I appreciate the pushback. I just don't buy it. I don't know where you're getting it from. I don't get that one. I gotta be honest. There are gonna be points of view that people have or that entities have that I don't agree with. Or sometimes I do agree with. It depends on what it is. It's gonna be a item by item thing. Just because I may believe something on one, it's not the infinite. Meaning just because something may be true in one case doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be true in another case. You have to take those things as a case by case. Also, this idea of believing in life on other worlds. Well, if there's enough evidence for it, yes. If you're asking me to believe something that doesn't have evidence, that you're feeling intuitively, then that's different. How could I get there? I mean, I can say, yeah, I think the government is corrupt. Yes. How does that translate into a virus that's killing 300,000 people by Christmas? I'm sorry. The virus is a real thing. It's things that we deal with, man. Is what it is, what it is, what it is, what it is. All right. I'm going to end this. I'm going to tell you guys to like, share, and of course, as always, subscribe. You will see me later today. We're going to try to have contributor appreciation today. I have a medical procedure that I need to get done. If the medication doesn't have me too loopy, we will be back. So I'll see you guys later, but definitely slam that subscribe button. I think YouTube has been doing something weird. So definitely hit the subscribe button if you are not, and hit the little bell to ensure that you get me popping in from time to time. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.